One goddamn religion. Slaughter. Good Muslims kill. 1. Islam's Holocaust. I pass judgment on them that their men shall be killed, their women and children made captives, and their property divided. Ishaq, 463 and Tabari 8:34. A great darkness was about to descend upon Islam. Ishaq, 461, just before the noon prayers, Gabriel came to the apostle wearing a gold turban. He was riding a mule. He said, "Have you laid down your weapons and stopped fighting, Muhammad?" "Yes," he replied. Gabriel said, "The angels have not laid down their arms. I've just returned from pursuing the enemy. Allah commands you to march to the Qurayza. I, too, will attack the Jews and shake them out of their homes." Angels in turbans, lumbering on mules, wielding swords, commanding Muslims to slaughter Jews, it's quite the picture of what Islam had become. That notwithstanding, Gabriel is actually the Messiah Daud, God's most capable and courageous man. He is not an angel. And his headdress will be as it was depicted prophetically by Zechariah and comprised of white linen. He will be suitably attired to anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant during his return on Yom Kippurim, a decade from the reenactment of this Islamic Holocaust. While a mule would fit in among the other asses, since Malachi's spiritual messengers fly, the plotting creature would otherwise be in the way. There had been no fighting during the Quraysh siege because the merchants gave up and went home. And the people now being besieged were Jews. They were descendants of Gabriel's beloved people, not his two enemies. He has and will fight to defend them, but never to annihilate them. Muhammad's Muslims could not march to the Qurayza since they were living alongside them. They had previously exiled the other two Jewish communities and moved into their homes. Therefore, there wasn't much that Muhammad or his pretend pal got right on this day. Aisha put down her dolls long enough to give us this report. Tabari 8:29 Muhammad pitched a round tent over Saad, the wounded anti-Semite, in the mosque. He laid down his sword, having just returned from the trench. Then Gabriel came to him and said, "Have you abandoned the fight? By Allah, the angels have not yet put down their weapons. Go out and fight the Jews." So he called for his breastplate and put it back on. Then he went out and the Muslims followed him. The mosque was nothing more than an open courtyard surrounded by the apartments dedicated to Muhammad's expanding harem, which is the reason for the tent. As for the sword, there is no indication that the Rasulite ever wielded one. When the time came to kill, he mimicked his ungod and delegated the bloody chore. Muslims, including Muhammad, hunkered down and shook like palm fronds in a tempest inside the homes they had stolen in Yathrib. It was the Quraysh who were stymied by the trench. And there was no fight to abandon since the merchants were on the way back home. Further, since Allah's angels hadn't been active around the trench, the notion of putting weapons aside was senseless. And, of course, as energy-based being akin to light, Malachi would have no use for swords. Their words would be more piercing than Star Wars blasters. Muhammad wore chain mail he had stolen from the Nadir Jews. He did not have a breastplate. Further, he called Muslims from the rear rather than leading them from the front. 3. This is Bukhari's sanitized theory on the arrival of the angelic tormentors. Bukhari, V5B59 and 4438. When the Prophet returned from the trench, laid down his arms and took a bath, Gabriel came to him covered in dust. "Why have you laid down your sword? We angels have not set them down yet. It's time to go out against them." The Prophet said, "Where to go?" Gabriel said, "This way," pointing towards the Qurayza. So the Prophet went out to besiege them. How does one scrub from one's brain the image of a 75-year-old incestuous pedophile and sand pirate, born in the year of the elephant in 522 CE, splashing around in a bucket of water, surrounded by young girls, while being visited by a dirty angel clamoring for Jewish blood? Completely delusional, the men responsible for the oral transmission of the Quran stated, Bukhari, V5B59 and 444, the dust rose in the streets of Medina as Gabriel's regiment marched through. The angels joined Allah's apostle in attacking the Qurayza Jews. Spiritual beings kicked up dust as they marched through the streets in pursuit of decapitating Jewish men, raping Jewish women, and enslaving Jewish boys and girls. On that basis, the Quran was a book, Allah was a god, and Muhammad a prophet too. Putting terror and plunder, slaughter and slavery ahead of teaching or prophecy, Ishaq, 461 and Tabari 8:28, the messenger commanded a crier to announce that all should heed and obey. He ordered that none should perform the afternoon prayer until after they reached the Qurayza settlement. The Prophet sent Ali ahead with his war banner against the Jews, and the Muslims hastened to it. Ali advanced toward their homes and heard insulting language from the Jews about Allah's messenger. Ali ran back and told the Prophet that the Jews were rascals and that there was no need for him to go near those wicked men. "Why?" Muhammad asked. "Have you heard them insult me?" "Yes," Ali answered. "Had they seen me," Allah's apostle replied, "they would not have said anything of the sort." The message of the Islamic crier on this day was diabolical and barbaric. A cruel and sadistic tyrant was in full command of malicious and immoral malcontents, and there would be hell to pay. Slaughtering Jews had become a religious rite, more important than prayer. Islam announced that it was at war with God's people. Since Islam's declaration of war against Jews was made by Muhammad and approved by his God, since it is undeniable and written in blood, why don't Jews living in Israel respond to this never-ending call to annihilate them with a declaration of war against Islam? The nation's fight for survival is not against Arabs, Hamas, Fatah, the PLO, Hezbollah, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, or Egypt, but, instead, against the religion presented in the Quran and Sunnah of Allah and Muhammad. If we were to play along with Ali and label Jews rascals because they insulted Muhammad with words as these ghoulish and perverted Muslims besieged them with raised swords and shrill rants, then it's an honor to be among rascals. Likewise, as a reward for my willingness to expose and condemn Islam, the Quran, Hadith, Allah, and Muhammad, I expect to hold Muhammad and Muslims accountable for what they have said and done. They will not like my verdict any more than I respect their verbiage. The envenomated Muslims continue to lie. Ishaq, 461 and Tabari 8:28. Before reaching the Qurayza, Muhammad greeted his companions. Has anyone passed you? He asked. Yes, Prophet, they replied. Dihya ibn Khalifa passed us on a white mule with a brocade-covered saddle. The translators of Tabari's history report, Dihya was a rich merchant of such beauty, the angel Gabriel is said to have assumed his features. When he arrived in Medina, every woman came out to look at him. In Islam, slaughtering for spoils is sexy. Ishaq, 461 and Tabari 8:28. Allah's apostle said, that was Gabriel. He was sent to the Qurayza to shake their homes and terrorize them. Billions have been conned into believing that a dust-covered, sword-wielding terrorist was God's messenger to mankind. And all the while, the wannabe God proved capricious and unreliable, abandoning his people so that Muslim Arabs could kill them. The Islamic proclamation and prosecution of war was more important than prayer to Islam's non-prophet and ungod. Tabari 8:29. The Holy Prophet, peace be unto him, said, no one should pray the afternoon prayer until they are in the territory of the Qurayza because warfare against the Jews is incumbent upon Muslims. There was now an addendum to the pledge to wage war against all mankind. Demeaning, slaughtering, raping, robbing, and enslaving Jews had become incumbent upon Muslims. And nothing has changed with Islam, the Quran or Hadith, Allah or Muhammad, since this declaration of war was pronounced. Ignore it at your peril. This is not my opinion or interpretation of Islam, it is theirs, and the only one that matters. Ishaq, 461. The Muslims had been totally occupied with warlike preparations. They refused to pray until they had come upon the Jews in accordance with Muhammad's order. Allah did not find fault with them in his book, nor did the messenger reprimand them for it. They were being religious. So, postponing this prayer so that they could decapitate innocent men, rape little girls, enslave the boys, and rob Jewish families must have been a tremendous sacrifice for them. Nonetheless, they were setting a fine example for terrorists everywhere. It's pretty hard to misinterpret this prophetic decree, warfare against the Jews is incumbent upon Muslims. Demonstrating his deep-seated abhorrence of Jews, Muhammad unleashed what we would call hate speech. Tabari 8:28. When the messenger approached the Jews, he said, you brothers of apes. Allah shamed you and cursed you. Muhammad's mouth was as foul as his manners. But I suppose, having a trash mouth made him ideally suited to recite the Quran. 6. While Yehudim are beloved by Yah, I can assure you that God views Muslims as asses, because he said so. And it is Allah who will be eternally shamed while Muslims are cursed. Verbal abuse was Allah's forte. And as a result, Islam became a blood sport. Bukhari v5b 59 and 449. On the day of the Qurayza siege, Allah's apostle said to Hassan, abuse them with your poems, for Gabriel is with you. As Gabriel's herald and servant, be assured that my Messiah, shepherd, brother, and king is as opposed to Muslims as they are hateful of Jews. And as it was when one man toppled a Philistine giant, causing him to be the first to perform the prostration, doubt alone will overwhelm billions of Muslims. Payback. Demonstrating the lack of objectivity Islam requires, those who recorded this hadith said that the Jews responded sarcastically to Muhammad's slur. They said, Abu al-Qasim, you have never been one to act impetuously or violently. That was all Muhammad knew. He had become a one-trick camel. Even when attacking the unarmed and defenseless Jews, Muhammad had but one strategy, starve them to the point of submission. An imposed fast was so religious of him. Ishaq, 461 and Tabari 8:29. Muhammad besieged them for 25 nights. When the siege became too severe, Allah terrorized them. Then they were told to submit to the judgment of Allah's messenger. Muhammad and Allah had become indistinguishable. They were Islam's unholy trinity, a false god, a false prophet, and the demonic spirit possessing the Razuli to turn three personas into a unified terrorizing tyrant. A Tabari's hadith proclaims, Tabari 8:29. Abu Lubaba gave a sign that it would mean slaughter. So they said, we will submit to the judgment of Sa'd. Since Sa'd's dying wish was to see the Jews massacred, and since he was the most fervent anti-Semite in the land, the request is incredible. 7. Nonetheless. Tabari 8:29. The Holy Prophet said, submit to his judgment. So they submitted. The messenger of Allah sent a donkey with a saddle padded with palm fiber, and he was mounted on it. That's obviously not how it happened, so let's check Ishaq's Sirah for a more accurate portrayal. Ishaq, 461. After the siege exhausted and terrorized them, the Jews felt certain that the apostle would not leave them until he had exterminated them. So they decided to talk to Qabi Asad. He said, people of the Jews, you see what has befallen you. I shall propose 3 alternatives. Take whichever one you please. He said, swear allegiance to this man and accept him, for, by Allah, it has become clear to you that he is a prophet sent from Allah. It is he that you used to find mentioned in your scripture book. Then you will be secure in your lives, your property, your children, and your wives. Muhammad's desire was genocide. He wanted to exterminate the Jews. And to the extent of his ability, he did, establishing Sunnah for Muslims to follow. As for the rest of this, there was only one option, submit or die. But in this case, submission was to Satan and the devil's advocate. Not only were the Jews aware that Muhammad wasn't a prophet, but it's obvious. His brand of evil was beyond compare. As we have learned, there is no mention of an Arab anti-Semite in the Torah, much less of a 7th century terrorist thug. And that is, of course, why the passage is never cited. Likewise, there is no mention of Allah in the Torah either. No one was secure in their lives around Muhammad. The Quran even states that he had a preferred claim on everyone's property and wives. Consider the gall it took to suggest this delusional alternative to the besieged Jews, especially after what they had endured at the hands of the wannabe Messiah. Even the Quran admits that they had repeatedly rejected Muhammad's assertions as being preposterous. They had disclaimed his bastardization of their Torah, and they had been repulsed by his warmongering nature and grotesque immorality. So, they were being told to swear an oath to a psychopath so that he would not kill them, steal their property, enslave their children, and rape their women. Ishaq 462 and Tabari 8:30, the Jews said, "We will never abandon the Torah or exchange it for the Quran." Asad said, "Since you reject this proposal of mine, then kill your children and your wives and go out to Muhammad and his companions as men who brandish swords, leaving behind no impediments to worry you. If you die, you shall have left nothing behind, if you win you shall find other women and children." The Jews replied, "Why would we kill these poor ones? What would be the good of living after them?" While I don't believe a word of this, if it were true, it provides a window into the depraved character of the first Muslims as well as the superior morality of these Jews. One can only presume that Muslims are so deluded by Islam that they believe everyone is grotesque. Since the Quran has presented children as a test, they were proposing that the Jews eliminate theirs. It is what good Muslims did on October 7, 2023 in Israel. And according to Allah, women are worthless and replaceable. But fortunately, within a decade of this writing in 2024, Yahowah will eliminate them as one would eradicate a plague. In the third alternative, Asad asked the Jews to violate their Sabbath and attack Muhammad by surprise. Since they had no weapons, it was another ploy. Muslims like to call infidels ungodly when they fight on holy days or in sacred months, yet they do so with glee. And if memory serves, in their major offensive against the Jews in 1973, Muslims launched a surprise attack on Yom Kippur. And October 7, 23 was a Shabat. Tabari 8:30, the Jews said, "We will not profane our Sabbath." Ishaq 462, then the Jews asked Muhammad, "Send us Abu Lubaba, one of the AWS, for they were allies, so that we can ask his advice." The Prophet complied and the Jews grabbed hold of him. The women and children were crying, so he pitied them. They said, "Abu, do you think we should submit to Muhammad's judgment?" 9 foot yes, Lubaba said. But he pointed with his hand to his throat, indicating that it would be slaughter. Lubaba later said, "As soon as my feet moved, I knew that I had betrayed Allah's apostle." Abu Lubaba rushed away and tied himself to a pillar in the mosque. He cried, "I will not leave this spot until Allah forgives me for what I've done. I betrayed his apostle." This confirms Muhammad intended to slaughter the Jews from the outset. There would be no surrendering. They would be murdered, not exiled. Muhammad knew that the Jews were starving and unarmed. He was toying with his victims as a cat plays with a captured mouse. Even worse, after decapitating the men, Muhammad and the first Muslims would rape their wives and children in their homes. They found savagery entertaining, not unlike what occurred on October 7 in Israel. Terrorizing God's people was all laughs and giggles. Ishaq 462 and Tabari 8:32, I heard Allah's apostle laughing at daybreak, so I said, "Why are you laughing, Prophet? May Allah make you laugh heartily." He replied, "Lubaba has been forgiven." Consider the depravity of a man who would laugh at this. It is reminiscent of Hitler, who said in Mein Kampf, "I have become incapable of pity." It is the nature of a psychopath. And the similarities don't end there. Hitler turned his command posts into mini brothels from which he orchestrated the extermination of Jews. This last conversation took place in one of the many apartments that comprised Muhammad's mosque, his command center. When Salama, the wife with whom the Prophet was being intimate, heard that Abu Lubaba had been forgiven, she asked, Ishaq 462 and Tabari 8:32, "Can I give him the good news?" He said yes, so she went and stood at the door of her room and said, "O Lubaba, rejoice, for Allah has forgiven you." Another treasure from this dark dawn also smacks of Hitler and his Nazi goons. Muhammad had personal guards like der Führer's stormtroopers, and the SS Ishaq 463 AMR-10 went past the apostles' guards who were commanded that night by Maslama. He challenged him. "Last time I checked, Moses didn't need an armed guard. I don't either, and I've received thousands of death threats from Muslims." But Muhammad not only had them, Maslama, his senior guard, was none other than the assassin who had murdered the first Jewish journalist. "Remember, I will kill him for you." The Islamic world appears to have used Gestapo tactics. After Maslama interrogated AMR at the door of Muhammad's mosque, Ishaq 463 AMR vanished into the night. It is not known to this day what happened to him. Some allege that he was bound with a rotten rope and cast away. Ishaq 463 and Tabari 8:33, in the morning, the Jews submitted to the judgment of Allah's messenger. The AWS leapt up and said, "Muhammad, they are our allies. You know what you did the other day with the allies of the Khazraj." Before besieging the Qurayza, the messenger had besieged the Kinuka, who were the confederates of the Khazraj. They had submitted to his judgment and were banished. Therefore, when the AWS spoke to him, the messenger said, "People of the AWS, will you not be satisfied if one of your own men passes judgment on them?" "Yes," they proclaimed. So the Prophet said, "It shall be entrusted to Saad, the Jew-hater, Muadh. Saad had been so fat, his armor failed to protect his extremities. He had been shot with an Arab arrow during the Battle of the Trench. To say he was a militant would be too kind. Bukhari V5b59 and 448, Saad said, "O Allah, you know that there is nothing more beloved to me than to fight in your cause against those who disbelieve your apostle. O Allah, I think you have put to an end the fight between us and the infidels. But if there still remains any fight with the infidels, then keep me alive till I fight against them for your sake." Ishaq 463 and Tabari 8:33. The Prophet had placed Saad in the tent of a Muslim woman in his mosque. She nursed his wound and earned merit for herself by serving Muslims. When Saad was struck 11 by the arrow, Muhammad said, "Put him in Rafaida's tent, so that I can visit him from nearby." Then the Prophet appointed him judge over the Qurayza Jews. His tribesmen lifted him onto a donkey on which they had put a leather cushion, for he was a stout, corpulent man. En route to Muhammad, the AWS said, "Treat our client well, for the Prophet has put you in charge of this matter." After many requests, Saad said, "The time has come for Saad, in the cause of Allah, not to be influenced by anyone's reproach." Some of the people who heard him announced the impending death of the Qurayza before Saad Muadh reached them because of the words he had said. For Saad, a dying mujahid, to gain entry into Allah's brothel, he would have to support his God's agenda. Ishaq 463 and Tabari 8:34. When Saad reached the messenger of Allah and the Muslims, the Prophet said, "Arise and go to your master and help him dismount." Then Muhammad said, "Pass judgment on them." Saad replied, "I pass judgment that their men shall be killed, their women and children made captives, and their property divided." Allah's apostle proclaimed, "You have passed judgment on the Jews with the judgment of Allah and the judgment of his messenger." With this pronouncement, the anti-Semite punched his ticket to paradise. Too bad, how sad, it is in Shi'al. But at least he'll be in familiar company. So that you are aware, I have reported every hadith collected by Tabari, Ishaq, and Bukhari regarding the assault on Yathrib's last Jewish community. 1,400 years of toil was about to be erased with the blade of a sword. In the midst of this Islamic pandering, there wasn't a word about Jewish combatants. 3 settlements, 3 sieges, and yet the Jews never struck a blow. This was textbook terror. It was a grotesque act of racially inspired genocide with a religious twist. And the motivation was greed. The Jews embodied everything the Muslims had failed to achieve. They were productive, prosperous, moral, literate, peaceful, honest, discerning, and known by God with actual prophets and inspired books. 12 Bukhari collected a series of hadith on this diabolical verdict. Bukhari, V5 B58 and 148 B59 and 447. Saad came riding a donkey, and when he approached the mosque, the Prophet said, "Get up for the best amongst you." Then the apostle said, "O Saad, these people have agreed to accept your verdict." Saad said, "I judge that their men should be killed and their offspring and women should be taken as captives." The Prophet said, "You have given a judgment similar to Allah the King's judgment." A second reveals, Bukhari, V5 B59 and 448. They then surrendered to the Prophet's judgment, but he directed them to Saad to give the verdict. Saad said, "I give my judgment that their men should be killed, their women and children should be taken as captives, and their properties distributed." A third proclaims, Bukhari, V5 B59 and 362. The Nadir and Qurayza violated their peace treaty, so the Prophet exiled the Nadir and then he killed the Qurayza men. He distributed their women, children and property among the Muslims. And what do you suppose the Muslim militants did to their women? The Quran says that they forced them into prostitution. The Hadith says that they raped them. Bukhari, V5 B59 and 459. I entered the mosque, saw Abu Said, sat beside him and asked about sex. Abu Said, "We went out with Allah's apostle and we received female slaves from among the captives. We desired women and we loved to do coitus interruptus." Yes, that's what it says. Another Bukhari hadith goes on to report that Muhammad never grew weary of tormenting Jews. Bukhari, V5 B59 and 461. He exiled all the Jews from Medina. They were the Jews of the Kinuka, the Jews of the Harida and all the other Jews from their homes. With something this character crippling, it's important to know that there are many confirmations, each affirming that Muhammad was a terrorist while destroying the myth he was a prophet. His Islam was a terrorist manifesto. It was conceived for rape and plunder. And on this day it was doing what it did best. Tabari 8:34. Saad turned away from the messenger out of respect. He said, "I pass judgment that the men shall be killed, the 13 property divided, and the children and women made slaves." Muhammad replied, "You have passed judgment on them with the judgment of Allah from above 7 heavens. The chorus continues with this refrain, Tabari 8:39. After the affair of the Qurayza ended, the wound of Saad broke open. Aisha reports, he passed judgment on the Jews and prayed saying, "O Allah, you know that there are no men whom I would rather fight and strive to kill than men who called your messenger a liar." Before we review what happened next, I want to reacquaint you with the salient verses of the 33rd surah which serves as the model for the Holocaust. Quran 33.025. Allahu turned back the unbelievers in their rage. They did not obtain any good or advantage. Allahu sufficed the believers, in the battle. Allahu is strong, almighty. Quran 33.026. And he brought down those who backed them among the people of the book from their strongholds, and cast ruba terror into their hearts, so that a group of them you killed, and a group of them you enslaved as captives. Quran 33.027. And he caused you to inherit their land and their houses and their wealth, and land you had not trodden. Allahu is on everything all-powerful. This Quranic verse is among Islam's most stinging indictments. It confirms its most barbaric act. But it's worse than it appears on the surface. Since it was Muhammad and the first Muslims who actually perpetrated these crimes, it confirms that Muhammad was Allah's henchman. With delusions of grandeur, Allah is little more than the snake that slithered out of the garden and into the Quran. While he has assumed the role of Arab rock idol, he is now the fractured black stone stuck in the wall of the Kaaba. Muhammad's behavior reflected his ungod's character, equal parts perverted and covetous, ruthless and murderous, sadistic and demonic. He was an anti-Semite to be sure. But he was also a gutless coward who never stood on his own 2 feet and was constantly propped up by the slithering 14 snake. He attributed this debauchery to his alter ego, giving genocide, rape, and human trafficking a religious veneer. Men have plundered before. Men have robbed before. Men have murdered, enslaved, and raped before. But no God has ever said, Allah who turned back the infidels in their rage. They did not obtain any advantage. Allah who sufficed the believers in the battle. Allah who is strong, mighty. And he brought down those who backed them among the people of the book from their strongholds, casting terror into their hearts, so that a group you killed, and a group you enslaved. And he caused you to inherit their property, their houses, and their wealth, and land you had not trodden. Allah who is on everything powerful. In an early chapter of Snake in the Desert, I included a speech from the Islamic world's leading imam. Al-Buraik, the Saudi ruling family's favorite sheikh, spoke at a telethon the Fahd family dictators hosted to enrich the families of Pakistani suicide bombers. This esteemed Islamic cleric said, "Oh, Muslims, don't take Jews and Christians as allies. Muslim brothers in Palestine do not have any mercy or compassion on the Jews, their blood, their money, or their flesh. Their women are yours to take, legitimately. Allah made them yours. Why don't you enslave their women? Why don't you wage jihad? Why don't you pillage them? Now you know where he got his material." This was what Muslims wrought on God's people 1,400 years ago, Tabari 8:35 and Ishaq 4:64, the Jews were made to come down, and Allah's messenger imprisoned them. Then the Prophet went out into the marketplace of Medina, it is still its marketplace today, and he had trenches dug in it. He sent for the Jewish men and had them beheaded in those trenches. They were brought out to him in batches. They numbered 800 to 900 boys and men. The lone voice of the Islamic religion had the imprisoned Jews brought to him so that he might enjoy the ghoulish spectacle. Even Hitler was too ashamed to visit Auschwitz, but not this psychopath. He turned Yathrib into 15a death camp. This was how Muslims conducted their version of the Holocaust. In words hauntingly similar to what Jews must have asked as Nazi trains hauled them off to concentration camps. Tabari 8:35 and Ishaq 4:64, as they were being taken in small groups to the Prophet, they said to one another, "What do you think will be done to us?" Someone said, "Do you not understand? On each occasion do you not see that the summoner never stops? He does not discharge anyone. And that those who are taken away do not come back. By God, it is death." The affair continued until the messenger of Allah had finished with them all. If 900 men and boys were dragged out of their imprisonment in batches and led into the central market square of Medina to be beheaded in front of Muhammad, the affair would have lasted 8 to 10 hours. Imagine a prophet perverted enough to watch until he had finished with them all. It's enough to make you vomit. And in reality, this community of Jews would have comprised 10,000 men, women, and children prior to the Islamic invasion, making the death toll on his day closer to 5,000. Should you wonder why I hate Islam, the Quran and Hadith, Allah and Muhammad, as well as good Muslims, you know the answer. It is the same answer the world witnessed on October 7, 2023. Muslims are monsters. Muhammad was this sadistic and twisted. Tabari 8:40, the messenger of God commanded that furrows should be dug in the ground for the Qurayza. Then he sat down. Ali and Zubair began cutting off their heads in his presence. These were furrows, not trenches, so they would have been shallow. This means that every step anyone walked in Yathrib, now Medina, would be upon decapitated and discarded Jews. Muhammad was an exceptionally evil man. Based upon his words, deeds, and legacy, and the carnage that he inspired, he's easily the worst person who ever lived. Quite 16 honestly, I'm looking forward to torturing him for the benefit of those he abused and then sending his sorry soul to hell. Therefore, I will not be this generous. Tabari 8:35 and Ishaq 4:64, Huyeh, the enemy of Allah, was brought out. He was wearing a rose-colored suit that he had torn all over with fingertip-sized holes so that it would not be taken as booty. His hands were bound to his neck with a rope. When he looked at Muhammad he said, "I do not regret opposing you. Whoever forsakes God will be damned." He sat down and was beheaded. The rabbi synthesized the Torah into a cogent response, "I do not regret opposing you. Whoever forsakes, separates, himself from God will be damned, separated, from him." In the Torah, Azab conveys, forsaken, damned, and separated. Speaking of the covenant relationship Yahowah formed with Abraham and his descendants through Ishaq and Jacob, God said that those who bless his people will be blessed while those who curse them will be cursed. It has already happened to the Muslims, and it is only going to get far worse for them over the next decade. This isn't true either, but it is revealing. Ishaq 4:64 and Tabari 8:36, according to Aisha, one Jewish woman was killed. By Allah, she was by my side, talking with me and laughing while Allah's messenger was killing her men in the marketplace. While it would not have been appropriate in these circumstances, during a lesser ordeal, this would have been what psychologists call a gallows laugh. It's a common manifestation of extreme stress, albeit not to the level of mass murder. So, while the reaction of the Jewish woman would be explainable, the behavior of the Muslim men was not. They were forcing Qurayza women to watch as they severed the heads of their fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons. The level of human depravity depicted here wouldn't be replayed again for 1,300 years. Satan's advocate, Adolf Hitler, forced Jews to remove their kin from cyanide 17 showers, only to place them in the roaring fires of his crematorium. Doctrines demented enough to compel such behavior cannot be tolerated. While the Pope may wish to kiss the Quran, I prefer to repudiate it. But then again, the Pope was wrong about Hitler, too. Ishaq 4:64 and Tabari 8:36, suddenly an unseen voice called out her name. It said, "Where is so and so?" She said, "Here I am." Good heavens, I cried, "What is wrong?" She said, "I am going to be killed because of something I did." She was taken away and beheaded. Aisha used to say, "I shall never forget my wonder at her good spirits, even when she knew she would be killed." The testimony of the victim of unprophetic pedophilia is revealing to a point. Based upon it, we know that Muslim and Jewish women were made to witness the savage inhumanity of Islam. And the reasons are many, including the fact that the first and best Muslims were proud of their ability to subjugate and slaughter. They had degraded to the point that they had become sadists who were titillated by torture. Muhammad's Muslims found the most gruesome forms of humiliation and mutilation entertaining. More than this, these murderous Muslims realized that the more savage they became, the greater compliance they would obtain. By decapitating 1,000 Jews bound hand and neck, and tossing their lifeless bodies into a shallow furrow in the center of their city, Islam's bloody exemplars would be able to control and rape Muslim and Jewish women without resistance for as long as the ghoulish spectacle remained vivid in their memories and beneath their feet. Even the men were coward, demonstrating the effectiveness of torture and terror. No one had the character or courage to contain the plague of Islam when it was limited to a ghoulish gang in a foreboding desert. This does not speak well of Arab men, but it does explain why the most heinous of religions festered among them. Something in their culture not only deprived them of the moral fortitude required to stand up against evil and repudiate it, but this 18-hole in their character laid them open to the whims of a sadistic psychopath and his abhorrent religion. The framers of Islam would have you believe differently, which is the reason for the next contrived story. One man among many is alleged to have tried to spare one among many. Should it be true, it's anecdotal and irrelevant, not only because he failed, or because he was the outlier, but because he initiated his response by capitulating to the tyrant responsible for the carnage rather than opposing and condemning him. Tabari 8:37 Thabit said, O Allah's messenger, Zabir, who was Abu Ar-Rahman, did me a favor, sparing my life, and I owe him a debt of gratitude. I wish to repay him for it. Grant me his life. The Prophet said, it is yours. The source of this hadith needed to be certain Muslims didn't equate the pretense of mercy with their non-prophet being tolerant of Jews. That is why he said that this man's name was slave to Ar-Rahman. If you recall, that was the name ascribed to the Lord of Islam throughout all of the initial surahs revealed in Babel. Long before Muhammad began buying his Quranic recitals from Jewish rabbis, he stole them from Arab converts to Judaism who had migrated from Yemen. They had replaced Yahowah's name with Rahman Merciful at the direction of Yathrib rabbis. The other reason that we can be assured that this story was fabricated is because the requested favor was to repay a debt. And yet, it was Muhammad's unwillingness to repay the debt he owed the Jews for selling him the stories that he had twisted to complete his Quran. We know this is true because Allah told us so over and over again. So, here is the remainder of the fable and its unhappy ever after conclusion. Ishaq 465 So Thabit went to him and Zabir said, Why do this? I'll be an old man without family and children. Thabit asked Muhammad for his family and he said, His wife and children are yours. But Zabir said, Without my property, how will we survive? So Thabit asked the Prophet for Zabir's wealth 19 and it was given to him. Thabit went to Zabir and announced that he had been given all of his property. Zabir said, Thabit, you are two-faced. What has happened to Asad? He has been beheaded. How about Huyay? He has been killed. And how fares Azal? He has been slain. How about the rest of the Qurayza men? Thabit said, They have all gone to their death. Zabir said, Then for the sake of the favor I once did for you, there is no good in living anymore. So Thabit brought him forward, and they struck off his head. When what he said was reported to Abu Bakr, he replied, He will soon meet his dear ones in the fires of hell, and there they will dwell forever. In some of the most tortured words ever uttered in the name of religion. Tabari 8:38 The Messenger of Allah commanded that all of the Jewish men and boys who had reached puberty should be beheaded. Then the Prophet divided the wealth, wives, and children of the Banu Qurayza Jews among the Muslims. Ishaq 465 When their wrists were bound with cords, the Apostle was a sea of generosity to us. If we had not endured this comprehensive 2,500-page chronological investigation of the Quran and Hadith up to this point in goddamn religion, it would have been impossible to fathom something this deadly, demented, damning, and demonic. But we are now equipped to handle the truth about how Islam degrades humans to the point that they become inhuman. It is what this disease does to those it infects. And we are witnessing this effect worldwide, with an upwelling of rage among Muslims in the aftermath of their atrocities on October 7, 2023. For those who think I'm making too big a deal over the escapades of Muslims mutilating, murdering, raping, abducting, incinerating, and celebrating on a single day, then you have missed the point. This day is that day, as has been every day since Muhammad and his demonic spirit used their Quran to turn Muslims into monsters. The most pervasive and destructive plague in the history of man is Islam, and it is still running rampant. Therefore, today, the aftermath of October 7, 2023 is being used to isolate and condemn Jews worldwide and to justify stealing Israel while promoting genocide. It will inspire further attacks, far worse than we have witnessed. It is all being done under the false black flag of occupation while accusing Jews of doing what Muslims have done since this day 1,400 years ago. There is an ignorant and immoral religious zeal on behalf of a non-existent Pakistani people to liberate Fakistan, such that it falls under the oppressive and deadly tyranny of Islam. The only reason that this is possible is because Jews have lost sight of the truth and are lashing out at symptoms rather than the actual menace plaguing them. They give voice to the myth of Palestinians, and by so doing, are digging the furrows of their own demise. Since they have wrongly sought to integrate Muslims into Israel, the consequence is that Islam is now poised to smite Jewish necks, all while the world accuses Jews of doing what Muslims have done to them for centuries. All the while, the planet is plunged into the delusional fog of progressive ignorance and hypocrisy. It is a recipe for the eradication of freedom and then life on earth. No doubt, Satan, in the guise of Allah, is proud. The volumes of goddamn religion were written expressly to expose and condemn Islam because it is the most virulent and lethal disease to ever plague our planet. I am committed to providing Israel with a God-given chance against the religious foe which declared war against them and has sought to rob, rape, subjugate, and slaughter them to the point of extinction. Those who do not embrace this warning and act accordingly will not be among the remnant celebrating Yahowah's return with the Messiah Dowd 10 years from the initiation of the final phase of Muhammad's war against Jews. 21 During the afternoon of October 7, 2023, I began composing my open letter to Israel, At War with Religion, which is presented in the Snake in the Desert volume of God Damn Religion. In it, I said a number of things that bear repeating at this time. 1. For Israel to survive, Jews must come to understand that they are at war with the religion of Islam and not Hamas. Eliminating Hamas is not only impossible, it will make no difference. And in this regard, terrorism is a tactic, not a foe. Muslims are the enemy because they use terror to impose their religion. 2. The myths and fables of the Philistinians must be bluntly and resolutely denounced for Israel to survive. So long as the world believes that there is an oppressed and occupied Palestinian people, Israel remains vulnerable to the suicidal implications of a terrorist state. 3. The story of every life affected by the October 7, 23 massacre needed to be vividly and uncompromisingly told online in pictures and words beginning that day. Even if it cost 1 billion shekels to present every hideous detail, it would have been more valuable than 1 billion bombs. The additional grief suffered as a result of this exposure will pale in comparison to what Jews will endure because they didn't follow this advice. 4. The most effective and moral means to achieving the immediate return of the hostages abducted from Israel was to trade them for the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Without their safe and immediate return, there had to be the immediate and assured demolition of the 2 scars desecrating the Temple Mount. This approach is vastly superior to trading innocent lives for convicted Muslim murderers, who once released, will kill again. 5. Invading Gaza had no chance of success, and played into Islam's hands, unifying the world against Israel and Jews. When the foe is a religion, bullets and bombs 22 manufacture more combatants than they kill. The invasion's lone advantage was that it proved that Israel is alone, isolated, and loathed in the world, unable to trust or rely upon anyone other than Yahowah. Good Muslims hate Israel and Jews, and the bad ones don't matter because they have no say in the religion. So long as Islam exists, this will not change. And now with the pervasive progressive influence in academia, the media, and politics, and their ignorant, immoral, and hypocritical support of Muslims against Jews, the next decade will be worse than that of the 1930s and 1940s in Europe. The time has come for Yehudim and Yisrael to stand with Yahowah and successfully battle such ruthless foes. Further confirming that he was a psychopath and not a prophet, Muhammad's earliest biographer reported. Ishaq 465, Then the apostle divided the property, wives, and children of the Qurayza among the Muslims. Allah's messenger took his fifth of the booty. He made known on that day the extra shares for horses and their riders, giving the horse 2 shares and the rider 1. A Muslim without a horse got 1 share of the spoil. It was the first booty in which lots were cast. This not only affirms that the first and best Muslims were monsters to engage in human trafficking after such an appalling slaughter of innocent people, it also means that pillaging the Jews was the means to a bigger payday, world conquest. That is the only reason that war horses received a double share of the stolen loot, including slaves. Those who had bought them with the spoils of previous assaults against the Jews were now being rewarded, encouraging them to increase their capacity for conquest. We know this to be the case since horses played no role in the siege of defenseless neighbors. Why lots, you may be wondering. Casting lots is a gambling game, one expressly forbidden by the hypocrites who founded Islam. The reason is twofold. First, the religion of Islam was a joke to these fellows. They simply used it as 23A tool to justify their disgusting behavior. The first Muslims were less religious than Hitler's SS. Second, the mercenaries needed a pecking order in which to select Jewish homes, property, businesses, women, and children. Muhammad didn't want them squabbling. Some sex slaves were younger and prettier than others. In the name of full disclosure, here is the report of Islam's first and finest historian, Tabari 8:38. On that day Muhammad made known the shares of the horsemen and shares of the foot soldiers, and he deducted from these shares his fifth. A horseman received 3 shares, 2 shares for the horse and 1 for its rider. A foot soldier received 1 share. The cavalry at the battle with the Qurayza numbered 36 horses. It was the first booty in which shares were allotted to them. According to this example, Sunnah, the procedure of the Messenger of Allah in the divisions of booty became a precedent which was followed in subsequent raids. Every Islamic apologist could cry out for 1,000 years and not undo the damage done by Muhammad and his militants. We put ourselves, and those we love, in harm's way when we allow Islam to masquerade as an Abrahamic religion. Islam is more similar to Nazism than Christianity. These crimes must not go unpunished. As further evidence that Islam was conceived to wage war against all mankind, and that it funded that quest by capturing and selling humans, we find. Tabari 8:39, Then the Messenger of Allah sent Sa'd bin Zayd with some of the Qurayza captives to Najd, and in exchange for them he purchased horses and arms. It was obvious, which is why I acknowledged it previously. But now we have this testimony from the mouths of the men who brought us the Quran and Hadith. The earliest and most respected historian of Islam's formative years and Quran commentator was diligent in his reporting and allowed the first and best Muslims and their non-prophet to confess to this crime. Muhammad's appalling malcontents captured Jewish women to sell them into sexual slavery, and 24 they traded the lives of Jewish children for war horses and arms. For this crime alone, Islam has no right to exist, much less be respected. Nothing could be clearer. Hitler financed his war machine on booty he stole from the Jews. In slave labor camps he forced Jews to work without pay building planes, tanks, and bombs. Muhammad set the precedent, funding his war effort on the flesh and property of God's people. These men and their methods were identical. And one day, within the next decade, this maniacal doctrine with its formidable allies will be unleashed on a world of 8 billion souls. Replete with nuclear and biological weapons, billions will perish. The reason Allah approved rape through sex with captives and slaves in the 33rd surah was because Muhammad was about to indulge. Tabari 8:38, the Prophet selected for himself from among the Jewish women of the Qurayza, Rayhana bt Amr. She became his concubine. When he predeceased her, she was still in his possession. When the Messenger of Allah took her as a captive, she showed herself averse to Islam and insisted on Judaism. Imagine the horror of being the sex slave of the man who had murdered your father and your brothers. Imagine being forced to have sex with a man who had given your mother up to be raped and who had sold your sisters into slavery to buy swords so that he could torment others. It's chilling, perversity on an unimaginable scale. Muhammad was the most reprehensible of subhumans. The first to chronicle the Prophet's revolting life explains. Ishaq 466, the Apostle, taking first dibs, chose one of the Jewish women for himself. Her name was Rayhana. She remained with him until she died, in his power. The Apostle proposed to marry her and put the veil on her, but she said, "Leave me under your power, for that will be easier." She showed a repugnance towards Islam when she was captured. 25 Muhammad raped Rayhana after killing, enslaving, and plundering her family. If you want to understand the doctrine of submission, put yourself in her sandals and gaze into the eyes of the man who slithered into your city with a malignant gang of Muslims, who is now abusing you sexually after murdering, robbing, and enslaving everyone you knew and loved. That is Islam as portrayed by the man who is inseparable from the religion. Ishaq 466, Allah sent down a Quran surah concerning the Trench and Qurayza raid. The account is found in the Confederates or Allied troops. In it he mentions their trial and his kindness to the Muslims. Remember, we sent a wind against the armies and they could not see. Allah sent this wind with his angels. Allah said, when they came at you from above and below, and when eyes grew wild and hearts reached your throats, you harbored doubts about Allah. Those in whose hearts is a disease said, what Allah and his messenger has promised us is nothing but delusion. Before I comment, let's read on. Ishaq 467, Allah addressed the believers and said, in Allah's apostle you have a fine example for anyone who hopes to be in the place where Allah is. Ishaq 468, then Allah said, some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying, you have finished your work and returned to me like those who sought martyrdom in prior battles. And some of you are still waiting to capitalize on Allah's promise of martyrdom. You do not hesitate in your religion and never doubt. Ishaq 468, Allah brought down the people of the scripture book. I forced the Qurayza from their homes and cast terror into their hearts. Some you slew, and some you took captive. You killed their men and enslaved their women and children. And I caused you to inherit their land, their dwellings, and their property. Allah can do all things. While I recognize that we have contemplated Allah's endorsement of genocide in the 33rd surah, Ishaq's review of the Quran ties the Islamic God irrevocably to the Islamic Holocaust. And there is no question that Ishaq's interpretation of the surah, as the earliest and best researched, is the most credible in Islam. Therefore, when 26 Allah told Muslims to follow Muhammad's example, he was specifically encouraging a fascist dictatorship, denial of all freedoms, antisemitism, terrorism, mass murder, continual war, armed robbery, the slave trade, the deprivation of women's rights, pedophilia, incest, and rape. Since kindness has been redefined as affecting the humiliation of God's people while perpetrating genocide, enslaving and raping innocent families, and robbing them of their lives, property, and liberty, we would do well to properly calibrate what mercy and forgiveness mean under these circumstances. When Allah protests that he is most merciful, oft forgiving, and the best of helpers, remember how he defined his kindness when Muslims were acting as sadistic savages against Jews. Perhaps, what Allah has promised is nothing but delusion after all. And yet, Allah is so impotent, the devil's lone contribution was to claim he made it windy in the desert, which is akin to saying that it is wet in the ocean. But since the Quraysh set a siege surrounding Yathrib, wouldn't the wind have been to their back and in the Muslims' faces on the other side of town, thwarting Allah's strategy? And since wind is a function of pressure differentials due to uneven heating and cooling, what was the purpose of the angels? Or said another way, in posturing such a ridiculous notion, was Allah simply playing Muslims for fools? There was, however, a nugget of truth in this diatribe. Those who follow Muhammad's appalling example will go to the place where Allah is. Unfortunately for them, it is called Shi'al hell. It has been obvious from the beginning that Islam is a murderous death cult. Its highest calling is for a Muslim to die as a martyr, killing for Allah. But Islam's nasty business has seldom been as bluntly presented as it is here in the Sirah. Allah said, some of you have fulfilled your vow to me by dying, you have finished your work and returned to me like those who sought martyrdom in prior battles. And some of you are still waiting to 27 capitalize on Allah's promise of martyrdom. You do not hesitate in your religion and never doubt. This change from demonic diatribes to unrelenting slaughter was made manifest during the Pledge of Aqaba. It was so profoundly important to Islam that the religion dates its beginning to this declaration of war against all mankind rather than to the first Quranic revelation 12 years prior. On that day in AH 622 CE, a gang of renegade pagan Arabs from the Jewish farming community of Yathrib raised their hands, saluted Muhammad, and changed the world with this affirmation. Tabari 6:133, we pledge our allegiance to you and we shall defend you as we would our womenfolk. Administer the oath of allegiance to us, messenger of Allah, for we are men of war possessing arms and coats of mail. O messenger, there are ties between us and the Jews which we shall have to sever. If we do this and Allah gives you victory, will you perhaps return to your own people and leave us? Muhammad smiled and said, nay, blood is blood, and bloodshed without retaliation is blood paid for. You are of me and I am of you. I shall war against whomever you fight. Ishaq, 204 and Tabari 6:134 Men of the Khazraj, do you know what you are pledging yourselves to in swearing allegiance to this man? Yes, they answered. In swearing allegiance to him we are pledging ourselves to wage war against all mankind. Ishaq, 205 If you are loyal to this undertaking, it will profit you in this world and the next. They said, we will accept you as a prophet under these conditions, but we want to know specifically what we will get in return for our loyalty. Muhammad answered, I promise you paradise. Tabari 6:134 So reach out your hand. They stretched out their arms and swore an allegiance to him. Ishaq, 205 and Tabari 6:133 When we had all sworn the oath of allegiance to the messenger, Satan shouted from the top of Aqaba in the most piercing and penetrating voice I have ever heard. People of the stations of Mina, do you want to follow a blameworthy reprobate? The messenger said, what does the enemy of God say? I am the devil, and I shall deal with you. 28 And this was the result. Ishaq, 468 Allah brought down the people of the scripture book. I forced the Qurayza from their homes and cast terror into their hearts. Some you slew, and some you took captive. You killed their men and enslaved their women and children. And I caused you to inherit their land, their dwellings, and their property. Allah can do all things. This isn't complicated. It is not veiled. It's just awful. The first Muslims were proud of themselves. Ishaq, 468 Gabriel came to the apostle when Saad was taken. He visited him in the middle of the night wearing an embroidered turban and said, O Muhammad, who is this dead man for whom the doors of heaven have been opened and at whom the throne shook? Since pretend Gabriel is credited with revealing the Quran to Muhammad, it's odd that he would need to ask the messenger about something that allegedly happened in heaven. Moreover, the dead man opening heaven's doors was a thug, a ruthless anti-Semite who loved to kill. If these behaviors rock Allah's throne, the Islamic God is a rather nasty fellow. Ishaq, 468 Saad was a fat man, but those who carried his funeral bier said that they had never carried a lighter one. Muhammad said, he had angelic pallbearers because the angels rejoiced when Saad's spirit shook Allah's throne. As popular as diets are today, I'm surprised that Muslims don't recommend slaughtering others and condemning Jews as the fastest way to lose weight. Ishaq, 469 An Ansar recited this poem, the throne of Allah shook for only one man, Saad the brave and bold, a glorious leader, a knight ever ready. Stepping into the battle, he cut heads to pieces. Saint Saad, a genuine Muslim hero. Ishaq, 469 The apostle said, every wailing woman lies except those who wept for Saad. Tabari 8:40 Aisha, the mother of the faithful, was asked, how did the messenger of God behave? She replied, his I did not weep for anyone. Der Rasulullah and der Führer were cut from the same cloth. 29 Ishaq, 469 On the day the Qurayza were slain, one Muslim was martyred. A stone was thrown on him and it inflicted a shattering wound. The apostle said, he will have the reward of 2 martyrs. In Islam you get bonus points for killing, robbing, and enslaving Jews. These poetic lines were recited during the Islamic Holocaust. Ishaq, 470 We attacked them fully armed, sharp swords in hand, cutting through heads and skulls. So what do you suppose would happen if these men were given their own state carved out of Israel and then armed to the teeth? This could serve as Islam's byline. Ishaq, 471 We were steadfast trusting in him. We have a prophet by whom we will conquer all men. All means all, that's all means. Ishaq, 472 Muhammad's companions are the best in war. That wasn't true, not by a long shot, but who's to blame them for trying? Ishaq, 473 Muhammad and his companions humiliated every doubter. That wasn't true either. Even to this day, doubters outnumber believers 4-1. And even then, belief is encouraged through the threat of death. Ishaq, 475 Allah commanded that horses should be kept for his enemy in the fight so they might vex them. We obeyed our prophet's orders when he called us to war. When he called for violent efforts we made them. The prophet's command is obeyed for he is truly believed. He will give us victory, glory, and a life of ease. Those who call Muhammad a liar disbelieve and go astray. They attacked our religion and would not submit. Armed militants starved defenseless families into submission and then beheaded and enslaved them because they would not obey Muhammad and submit to Allah in the religion of Islam. Therefore, when the Islamic religion is practiced in accordance with Muhammad's orders and Allah's commands as they are recorded in the Hadith comprising Sunnah and in the Quran, Muslims wage war against all mankind, annihilating and ruthlessly subjugating those who do not capitulate. And when we acknowledge the 30 obvious, that both were sadistic psychopaths engaged in promoting and glorifying the most savage and appalling acts imaginable, this is a highly unappealing outcome. So, in this case, the Jews in Yathrib serve as the canary in the mine predicting what will happen to the rest of humanity if the toxin isn't contained. The Muslims who knew Muhammad's Sunnah and Allah's Quran from personal experience have defined their war against humanity as the product of blind obedience, a lifestyle of terror, the glorification of violence, and victory through grotesque immorality. Islamic jihad was designed to be vexing, which is to say that Muslims will distress and annoy, harass and confound disbelievers in an abrasive fashion, aggravating and exasperating them in ways that are hard to understand for as long as the religion exists. This is Satan's intent. To forestall Yahowah's return, he must either turn men into unappealing monsters or exterminate them. Islam does both. Ishaq, 479 Slain in Allah's religion, Saad inherits paradise with the martyrs. His was a noble testimony. When he pronounced his verdict on the Qurayza, he did not judge on his own volition. His judgment and Allah's were one. Saad is among those who sold his life for the garden of bliss. Considering the verdict called for genocide, larceny, and enslavement, Allah's complicity in these crimes is vexing. This, too, is hideous. Ishaq, 481 The apostle slew them in their own town. With our troops he surrounded their homes. We shouted out cries in the heat of battle. The Jews were given the scripture and wasted it. Being blind, the illiterate said, they strayed from the Torah. You Jews disbelieved the Quran and yet you have tasted the confirmation of what it said. May Allah make our raid on them immortal. May fire burn in their quarter. They will no longer ruin our lands. You Jews have no place here, so be off. To each his own, free will and all, but it will not be without consequences. With Yahowah's support and direction, I promise to hold all of these men accountable for 31 this barbaric crime. And an eternity of separation in Sheol, which is assured, will be insufficient to recompense those that these deceived savages have abused. But I will not stop there. I will pursue and repay every Muslim who has opposed God's people, in addition to those who aided, abetted, and applauded them. The same standard will be applied to anti-Semitic Christians, rabbis, fascists, communists, and progressives. So, believe and promote what you will, but be advised that there is a God and he is not amused. In this case, these Muslims were so stupid and gluttonous that they believed and repeated Muhammad's and Allah's lies. While it is true that Jews were the conduit through whom Yahowah provided the Torah and Nabi, and while Jews have largely squandered it, straying from the Torah with their Talmud, the Quran is in irrefutable and irreconcilable conflict with God's testimony. For in the Torah and Nabi, Yahowah returns for his people, reconciling himself with them by reaffirming the Berith while integrating his Torah into our lives. He does not attack, enslave, or annihilate his family. And yet, the Quran was confirmed by perpetrating the very crimes Yahowah will forever resolve. It is also true, at least to a point, that the Quran and Hadith have immortalized the nature of the Islamic atrocities against Jews and their own kin. The learned and wise, the compassionate and courageous, can expose and condemn Islam because Muslims confess to the most heinous of crimes. There is no need to speculate or interpret because the evidence has been retained for us to evaluate and excoriate. There is a haunting echo of today in what was said on this day. Speaking of Yathrib, which Yehudim and Yisraelites had called home for the past 1,400 years, the Muslims who invaded the city just 4 years prior, and would soon rename what they stole, Medina, had the audacity to say, they will no longer ruin our lands. You Jews have no place 32 here, so be off. How is that any different than Muslims invading Judea and Israel, the homeland of Yehudim and Yisraelites for the past 3,993 years at the time of the October 7, 2023 invasion, while renaming it Palestine and claiming that Jews no longer belonged? Is this hadith not the forerunner of, from the river to the sea Palestine will be free, which predisposes dispossessing Jews in favor of Muslims? Is it not by knowing Islam's past that we come to understand its present and our future? And to think, progressives, who insist that they are enlightened, are facilitating genocide, ignorant of these confessions. I saved the worst for last. Ishaq, 480, the Qurayza met their misfortune, now there's an understated word. In humiliation they found no helper. A calamity worse than that which fell upon the Nadir befell them. On that day Allah's apostle came to them like a brilliant moon. We left them with blood upon them like a pool. They lay prostrate with the vultures circling round. I am going to dedicate the remainder of this chapter to the similarities between Mein Kampf and the Quran because I do not want God's people to endure a third Holocaust. The veil of divine inspiration must be removed from Islam so that a proper defense might be mounted against its sadistic depravity. And since the preponderance of people are willing to oppose the influence of Hitler, Mein Kampf, and Nazism, while reluctant to condemn Muhammad, the Quran, and Islam on the same grounds, a comparison between the Islamic scriptures and Mein Kampf is useful. Muslims already know that this is the case, which is why, second only to the Quran, Mein Kampf is the most acclaimed among them. Then to deflect the criticism that devotion to this anti-Semitic text would otherwise bring, Muslims routinely project their affinity for Nazism onto 33 Jews, depicting those most abused by Hitler as the opposite of what they are. Before we dive back into the Nazi gospel, which is essentially Hitler's updated and more intelligible version of the Quran, let's ponder its implications based on what others had to say about Hitler and his influence on them. The first was penned by Dr. Paul Joseph Goebbels in 1929. He confirmed that Hitler, like Muhammad, was a messianic figure, and that Nazism, like Islam, was intentionally veiled in religiosity. We believe that fate has chosen him to show the way to his people. Therefore we greet him in devotion and reverence, and can only wish that he may be preserved for us until his work is completed. Der Führer works the miracle of faith, enlightening our people like a meteor before their astonished eyes, instilling in us a belief that eliminates despair. The similarities between this and the hadith we have just read are uncanny. This next statement is from political author, Kurt Sontheimer, in Munich, although it reads more like Muslims in Medina. Salvation can only come about through a leader selected and blessed by providence, who can rescue his people from their plight, restore them, make them honest, and serve as the embodiment of their longing, the bearer of godly power and destiny, an organ of a power transcending him. I suspect that most readers were heretofore unaware that Islam was more war manifesto than religion or that Nazism emerged as a religious cult with its prophet and leader revered and obeyed as was the case with Muhammad. Both religions were predicated upon predestination and upon the words and deeds of a single and uniquely designated individual with whom any dispute was fatal. And both declared war on the planet. As with the Islamic pledge of Aqaba, Nazis pledged their loyalty. Friends, raise your right arm and cry out with 34 me proudly, eager for the struggle, and loyal unto death, Heil Hitler. Then with religious symbolism oozing out of every pore, Goebbels introduced his apostle, the leader of a new, young Germany, der Führer, the prophet, the fighter, the last hope of the masses. Nazism is regurgitated Islam, with Hitler and Aryans in the roles of Muhammad and Arabs. They were both perceived as leaders, prophets, and fighters, even the last hope of man. They were catastrophically wrong. Rudolf Hess embodied the spirit of both movements when he wrote, the leader must be absolute in his propaganda, in his speeches, and words. He must not weigh the pros and cons like an academic, he must never leave his listeners the freedom to think. The great popular leader is similar to the great founder of a religion. He must communicate to his listeners an apodictic faith. Only then can the masses be led where they should be led. They will then also follow the leader if setbacks are encountered, but only if he has communicated an unconditional belief in the absolute rightness of his cause. He said that Hitler was just like Muhammad. And he was right. Are you listening? Are you prepared to respond? And Hess' claims on behalf of his Führer were similar to Allah's on behalf of his prophet. Ishaq 2:49 and Quran 2.023, the apostle calls you to the truth about which there is no doubt. And if you are in doubt about what we have sent down to him or in doubt about what he says, then produce a surah like it and summon witnesses other than Allah. But you will not because you cannot, for the truth is beyond doubt. Apart from time and place, there is no appreciable difference between the founder of Islam and Nazism. Their recitals were otherwise indistinguishable. They cannot coexist in a civilized world because they are vicious and deadly and neither can tolerate a rival. 35 Mein Kampf 137, the movement has to avoid everything that could diminish or even weaken its ability to influence the masses, perhaps not for demagogic reasons, but because without the enormous power of the masses no great idea, no matter how lofty it may appear, is realizable. Islam says, Quran 9.029, fight and kill those who do not believe in Allahi, not in the last day, not they make unlawful what is made haram by Allah and his Rasul and not they accept the religion as the truth, those who were given the written book, until they pay the humiliating jizya tax in submission and they are subdued. Quran 9.123, O you who believe, fight and kill those close to you of the kafir, and make them realize that you are harsh and unrelenting and realize that Allah with those who fear. Like Muhammad, Hitler was committed to denouncing and slaughtering all who opposed him. While his favorite enemy was the Jews, he despised those who held the political power he craved as well as those whose view of life didn't meld entirely into his own. In time, the Catholic Church would become the catalyst in his rise to power, but on this day, that had not yet occurred. Mein Kampf 139, the Catholic clergy brutally infringes German rights. They side with the enemy because the head of the Catholic Church is not in Germany, a fact which contributes to their hostility. Mein Kampf 140, Germany would gain enormously by a victory against the Church. Pope Pius XII resolved this conflict by endorsing the Third Reich. Working cooperatively, they came up with a plan for the Church to share control over German lives under the oversight of Hitler. Without this capitulation, Hitler would have failed before the World War began. Der Führer was nearly as ignorant about the religions he was appending as was Muhammad. Unaware that the various cults of Christianity were anti-Semitic, he wrote, Mein Kampf 141, both religions take an attitude toward the Jews that is counter to the concerns of the nation and the real needs of religion. 36 Hitler didn't demean Islam in this regard because he recognized that the Quran shared his demented view. It says, Quran 5.051, O you who believe, do not take al-Yahudah the Jews and al-Nasara the Christians as allies. They are allies of one another. Any one of you who befriends them or allies with them is surely one of them. Ishaq 369, the Jews were in a state of fear on account of our attack upon them. The Prophet declared, kill every Jew who falls into your hands. Mein Kampf 414, witness the Jude of Erech, Jews perish, outcry in which our youth organizations have taken up. Projecting his faults on his enemy, Hitler impersonated Muhammad. Mein Kampf 415, Jews are a pack of wolves whose appetite for booty only dissolves when the pack's hunger abates. They are united only by common booty or a common enemy. Otherwise they are a horde of rats, fighting bloodily among themselves. If the Jews were left alone, they would suffocate in their own dirt and filth. Jews have a shame culture in which everything they possess is really the property of other peoples and it is spoiled in their hands. Speaking of the same people, the Quran says, Quran 2.059, but changed those who wronged word other which was said to them so we sent down upon those who wronged a punishment from the sky because they were defiantly disobeying. Quran 2.064, then you, Jews, turned away from after that. So if not grace of Allahi upon you and his mercy, lo, you would have been of the losers. Quran 2.065 and lo, you knew those who transgressed among you in al-Sabti the Sabbath. So we said to them, be apes despised. Quran 2.066 so we made this a deterrent punishment as an example for those front them and those after them and a warning for those who fear. Ishaq 2.46 the surah of the hypocrites came down because some men sent secret messages to the Nadir Jews when the apostle besieged them. So Allah sent down, have you not considered the hypocrites who say to their brethren, the people of the book, Jews, we shall never obey anyone against you. If you are attacked by the Muslims and driven out we will help you. Allah bears witness that they are liars. Like Satan when he says to men, disbelieve. 37 This surah goes on to report, Quran 59.013 Lo, verily, more intense fear in their breast than Allahi. But because they an ignorant people. Quran 59.014 Not will they fight you all except in fortified towns or from behind walls. Their violence among themselves is severe. You think they are united, but their hearts divided. That is because they are people without reason. Quran 59.015 Like example those from before them, shortly they tasted evil result of their affair and for them a painful punishment. Hitler, like Muhammad, realized that the easiest way to defame was to lie. They were both masters of oral deception and physical abuse. Mein Kampf 418 The Jew never possessed a state with a territorial boundary. Mein Kampf 420 Jews live in other states as parasites, disguised under the name of religion. The Jew is a master of lying. Everything they have is purloined or stolen. The Jew cannot be religious because he lacks idealism and he does not believe in the hereafter. Remember the long diatribes in the second surah. Quran 2.077 Do not they know that Allah knows what they conceal and what they declare? Quran 2.078 And among them illiterate ones do not know the book except wishful thinking and not they except guess. Quran 2.079 So woe to those, Jews, who write, faking, the book with their hands. Then they say, this from Allahi, to barter with it for a small price and some profit. So, woe to them for what their hands have written. And woe to them for what they earn. Quran 2.080 They say, never will touch us the fire except days numbered. Say, have you taken from Allahi an Aden pledge or covenant? So, never will break Allahu his promise. Or you say against Allahi what not you know. Quran 2.081 Yes, whoever earned evil and surrounded him with his sins, so those companions of the fire. They in it abide forever. Alas, Hitler could only burn them once. Der Führer explained why der Prophet turned three distinctly different enemies into one, hating Arabs, then Jews, and Christians. He called them all pagans, unbelievers, infidels, and even friends of one another. Here's why. Mein Kampf 152 The efficiency of the true national leader consists 38 primarily in preventing the division of the attention of a people, always concentrating it on a single enemy. The fighting will be more uniform, the force will be greater, the cause more magnetic, and the blow more powerful. It is part of the genius of a great leader to make adversaries in different fields appear as always belonging to one category. People are weak and unstable characters and thus various enemies will lead to incipient doubts as to their own cause. As soon as the masses waver, due to confronting too many enemies, objectivity steps in, and the question is raised whether all others are wrong and their movement alone is right. This provides a brilliant insight into Muhammad's otherwise unexplained tactics. Allah's mouthpiece said that the Jews were aiding the Arabs so they were really the same enemy. But once Muslims had robbed every Jew of every possession and plundered every Arab, Muhammad needed a bigger target. So the Prophet claimed that the Christians were allies of Allah's enemy. As a result, his companions plundered the Byzantine world for booty. Bukhari v4b 52 and 267 The Prophet said, Khosrau will be ruined. There won't be a Persian king after him. Caesar will be ruined. There will be no Caesar after him. You will spend their treasures in Allah's cause. Then speaking of a single enemy, Quran 8.073 Those who disbelieve are allies to one another. So, if you, Muslims, do not do this, make victorious Allah's religion of Islam, there will be fitna trials and temptations, turmoil and confusion, on earth, and great facet and mischief and corruption. Hitler sang from the same hymnal. He said Germany's leaders were supported by Jews and then falsely claimed that the church was protecting them. Thus, they were perceived as the same enemy from the perspective of der Führer. But once he had subdued and pillaged them, he needed a bigger target. So, he said that the Jews and the church were in cahoots with governments on the left and right promoting Marxism and democracy. They became an enemy that 39 needed to be conquered so that Nazi Aryans might rule the world uncontested. According to der Führer, you were either a Nazi or an enemy. Today you are either a Muslim or an enemy of Islam. Der Prophet saw the world in two pieces, the house of submission or the house of war. This fundamental agreement between Islam and Nazism is why we must come to terms with Muhammad's legacy. The only difference between Mein Kampf and the Quran is that Hitler was a more inspired orator and writer than Muhammad and Allah, and he was able to bring more powerful weapons to bear than horses and swords. Mein Kampf 153 Therefore, a number of essentially different enemies must always be regarded as one in such a way that in the opinion of one's own adherents the war is being waged against one enemy alone. This strengthens the belief in one's own cause and increased one's bitterness. We have seen how Muhammad's militants became increasingly embittered and belligerent. The poems they recited as they beheaded, enslaved, plundered, and raped the Qurayza Jews serve as proof. Islam's position coincides with Hitler's assessment, even today. For example, in the last 30 years, Islamic governments have murdered and mutilated millions of non-Muslims. The Quran is the reason why. Quran 5.033 The only punishment, for those who wage war, against Allah and His Rasul and who make mischief in the land, is, that they shall be killed or they be crucified, or their hands and their feet must be cut off on opposite sides. They can be exiled from the land. That, for them, is disgrace in the world, and in the hereafter, a dreadful torment and severe punishment. As was the case with Muhammad, it was Chancellor Hitler's religion in his way or condemnation and decapitation. Mein Kampf 148 If the clerical caste does not disappear voluntarily, I will direct propaganda against the church until people will be unable to hide their disgust when 40 the word church is mentioned. I will have movies made to show how the clergy has exploited people, lived off them, and how they sucked money out of the country. I will show how they worked with Jews, how they practiced immoral vice, and how they spread lies. I will make the clergy look ridiculous, a tangled mass of corruption, selfishness, and deceit. Let them complain for I will have youth and the masses on my side. If I set my mind to it I will destroy the church. The whole institution is just a hollow shell. One good kick and it will tumble together in a heap. The only point of digression is that Hitler was more accommodating than Muhammad. It wasn't a coincidence that the dark spirit of Nazism focused on Islam's enemies. It merely tells the discerning who their God really was. Rebuking the same enemy, Christians and Jews, Islam's spirit cried, Quran 9.029 Fight those who do not believe in Allahi, nor in the last day, nor make unlawful that which has been forbidden by Allahu and His Rasulullah, nor acknowledge not the religion of truth among those who were given the book, until they pay the debilitating tax in submission while being subdued. Quran 9.030 Allah who destroy them. How deluded are they? Quran 9.033 He the one who sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of the truth, Islam, to make it superior over all religions even though the disbelievers hate. Ishaq 269 How can we follow you, Muhammad, when you have abandoned our Qibla? You do not say that Uzair is the son of God. So Allah revealed, Jews say that Uzair is the son of God and Christians say the Messiah is the son of God. That is what they say with their mouths, copying the speech of those who disbelieved in earlier times. Allah fight them. How perverse are they? Hitler presented himself as a prophet engaged in spiritual warfare. By his own admission, he had to destroy Judeo-Christianity in order to establish his own religion. And make no mistake, Muhammad's credentials as a prophet were no better than Hitler's. They both got every prediction wrong. Mein Kampf 148, one cannot serve two masters. I consider the foundation and the destruction of religion more 41 important than the foundation and destruction of a state, let alone a party. Nazism was founded as a religion, one designed to attack and destroy other religions. This revelation affirms that Nazism and Islam are quite similar. Both tyrants rebuked Judeo-Christianity so that they could build their own religious dogma in its place. Mein Kampf and the Quran gave Hitler and Muhammad the ultimate weapon. Quran 2.193, and fight them until there is no more fitna, temptation, trials, and sedition toward disbelief and religion is only for Allahi. Then if they cease and desist, then no hostility except against al-Zalim cruel lords and oppressive tyrants. Muzzin Khan and Muhammad al-Hilali, fight them until there is no more fitna, disbelief and polytheism, i.e. worshipping others besides Allah, and the religion, worship, will all be for Allah alone, in the whole of the world. But if they cease, worshipping others besides Allah, then certainly, Allah is all-seer of what they do. Quran 4.090, if they turn back from Islam, becoming renegades, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. Quran 8.012, when your Lord inspired the angels, I am with you, so keep firm those who believed. I will cast al-Ruba terror into the hearts of those who have disbelieved. So strike them over the necks, and smite over all their fingers and toes. Quran 8.013, that because they opposed Allah and his Rasulullah. And whoever opposes Allah and his Rasulullah, then lo, Allah severe in punishment. Quran 8.014, that. So taste it. And that for the disbelieving infidels, is the punishment of the fire. Quran 8.039, and fight them until there is no more fitna, disbelief by worshipping others, and the religion, all of it, will all be for Allahi, in the whole of the world. Quran 8.057, so when you fight them and if you gain control and dominance over them in al-Harb, the battle and war, strike fear in them and punish them severely in order to make an example of them. Frighten them off and disperse those who are behind and support them, so that they may learn a lesson and be deterred. Here's how he used his religion. Mein Kampf 148, it is certain that at all times unscrupulous men did not shrink from making religion a tool for their political business 42 affairs, for this is always the object. Scoundrels abuse it to serve their base instincts. Hitler is right. Throughout time charlatans have used religion to control and fleece the masses and thereby satiate their personal cravings. But he was also wrong, for the ultimate maestros of religious malfeasance were der Führer and der Rasulullah. Muhammad's situational Quran revelations justified world war, mass murder, armed robbery, abduction, slave labor, terrorism, plunder, and conquest as Islamic necessities. Recognizing the reason and the benefit, Hitler explained, Mein Kampf 149, as soon as a religion's wickedness is attacked, the mendacious clerics will claim that their actions were justified. The leader will say that the salvation of the religion and the church is due to him and his eloquence alone. And since the citizens are as stupid as they are forgetful, they will not see past the great noise he makes. As such, the scoundrel achieves his goal. Like Muhammad, Hitler became what he condemned. But the sly fox of a cleric knows only too well that this has nothing to do with religion, and thus he laughs up his sleeve. Allah said, Quran 8.001, they ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils of war are for Lillahi and the Rasulullah. So fear Allah and adjust everything between you to obey Allah and his Rasul messenger if you are believers. Quran 8.002, the believers, to the exclusion of all else, are those when Allah is mentioned, feel fear, in their hearts. When his verses are recited to them, they increase them in faith. Upon their Lord they put their trust. Quran 8.003, those who constantly perform the obligatory prayer, and out of what we have provided them, they spend. Quran 8.00, for those are the true believers, for them are ranks and grades with their Lord and a pardon with a generous provision. Quran 8.005, as your rabbi brought you out from your home in truth, to fight, while, lo, some believers averse to it. Quran 8.006, they dispute and argue with you concerning the truth after what was made clear, as if they were driven to death with their eyes wide open. 43 Quran 8.012, when your Lord inspired the angels, I am with you, so keep firm those who believed. I will cast al-Ruba terror into the hearts of those who have disbelieved. So strike them over the necks, and smite over all their fingers and toes. Quran 8.013, that because they opposed Allah and his Rasul. And whoever opposes Allah and his Rasul, then lo, Allah is severe in penalty and punishment. Quran 8.014, that. So taste it. And that for the disbelieving infidels punishment, of the fire. Quran 8.015, O you who believe. When you meet those who kafir are reconciled advancing, then not turn the backs to them. Quran 8.016, and whoever turns his back to them on such a day, unless it be a stratagem of war, or to retreat to a troop of his own, has indeed incurred the wrath from Allahi. And his abode hell, and worst and most wretched destination. Quran 8.017, you killed them not, but Allah who killed them. And you did not cast terror, or throw when you did throw or cast, but Allah threw, that he might test the believers by a righteous trial and great favor from him. Verily, Allah is all-hearer, all-knower. Quran 8.027, O you who believe. Do not betray Allah and His Rasul, nor betray your amanat things entrusted to you, all the duties which were ordained while you know. Quran 8.046 And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute with one another, lest you lose courage and your strength depart and you falter. And be steadfast. Surely, Allah is with those who persevere. Quran 8.057 So when you fight them and if you gain control and dominance over them in al-harb the battle and war, strike fear in them, and punish them severely in order to make an example of them. Frighten them off and disperse those who are behind and support them, so that they may learn a lesson and be deterred. Quran 8.060 Make ready against them whatever force and firepower you can muster, every obtainable transport of military equipment you can mobilize, including war mounts, to threaten and terrify the enemy of Allah in your enemy, and others besides whom you may not know, but whom Allah who does know. And whatever you spend in the cause of Allah shall be fully repaid to you, and you not be treated unjustly. Quran 8.065 O Prophet! Inspire and motivate, urging the believers to al-qitl the slaughter. If there are 20 steadfast 44 amongst you, they will, or might, overcome 200, and if there are 100 they will, or might, overcome 1,000 of those who disbelieve, because they, the disbelievers, are a people without intelligence, comprehension, or understanding. The tyrants claimed that the most immoral means were justified by the end result. Mein Kampf 149 Among the priests are those whom their office is only an instrument for the gratification of their political ambition. Rather than uphold truth they promote lies and calumnies. An honest pastor devoted to his mission is an island in a communal swamp. I condemn the church as such, and long for the hour when at last heaven will smile on us again. Hitler had his Goebbels, and Muhammad his Allah. They worked together against humanity. Quran 5.077-78 Say, people of the book, do not overstep the bounds in your religion, or follow the people who erred in their vain desires and led many astray from the right way. Cursed are the unbelievers among the children of Israel, because they disobeyed. Quran 5.080 You see many of them taking allies who disbelieved. Surely evil sent forth for them, making Allah who angry with them, and so they will endure the punishment forever. This next declaration was designed to clear the field for der Führer's ambition. Mein Kampf 150 If you believe yourself to be chosen by destiny to announce the truth, then do so, but then have the courage to do so not by way of politics. In other words, if you have been chosen by the devil you must destroy other religions and start your own. And please don't miss the fact that destiny and predestination are kissing cousins. Also, both men had their own unique perspective on the truth. Working for Satan, like his mentor Muhammad, Hitler had to keep the heat on the Jews and keep folks focused on the flesh. Mein Kampf 154 I had found a slogan against Judaism on a religious basis, overshadowing all racial differences. Mein Kampf 160 I detested the conglomerate of 45 races like the eternal fission of fungus, Jews and more Jews, the personification of incest. Allah said, Quran 5.082 Muhammad Assad, thou wilt surely find that, of all people, the most hostile to those who believe, in this divine writ, are the Jews as well as those who are bent on ascribing divinity to aught beside God, and thou wilt surely find that, of all people, they who say, behold, we are Christians, come closest to feeling affection for those who believe. In this divine writ this is so because there are priests and monks among them, and because these are not given to arrogance. Ishaq 250 Allah brought the bestial transformation, turning Jews into apes despised. Quran 2.064 Then you, Jews, turned away from after that. So if not grace of Allah upon you and His mercy, lo, verily, you would have been of the losers. Quran 2.065 And lo, you knew those who transgressed among you in al-Sabti the Sabbath. So we said to them, be apes despised. Quran 2.066 So we made this a deterrent punishment as an example for those from them and those after them and a warning for those who fear. Ishaq 254 Allah revealed, the Jews deny Him. They are wretched, so Allah cursed them and He will give them a shameful punishment. Hitler believed that he was fate's messenger, the final prophet, the man called by God to plunder the world and establish an uncontested religion. Mein Kampf 161 Fate bestowed upon me that I should devote my honest services to the nation. Most will not be able to understand the intensity of such a longing, craving for power. By the will of fate we will fight for the holy treasure. This longing tortures those it has seized and denies them contentedness and happiness until the doors of the house are open and our blood finds peace in one Reich. We've heard this before, Quran 8.001 They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils of war are for lillahi and the Rasulullah. So fear Allah and adjust everything between you to obey Allah and His Rasul messenger if you are believers. Bukhari V5b 59 and 702 Allah did not admonish anyone who had not participated in the Ghazwa, terrorist raid, of Badr, for in fact, 46 Allah's apostle had only gone out in search of the Quraysh caravan so that he could rob it. And Bukhari V4b 52 and 220 The treasures of the world were brought to me and put in my hand. The next Mein Kampf taunt reminds us of the Hadith's first attempt to explain why Islam was created. Tabari 6:82 Muhammad claims that Allah has sent him as his messenger with this religion and that the treasures of Chusros and Caesar will be given to him by conquest. Mein Kampf 174 Nature, the goddess of Mother Earth, does not know political frontiers. She puts people on the globe and watches the game. He who is the strongest becomes her favorite child, the right to be the master of existence. Mein Kampf 175 The more brutal the people the greater their living area. In other words, the world will someday come into the hands of the superior people. And one should know that this world will be subject to the fiercest fights in mankind's existence. Man grows strong in struggles but perishes through peace. Allah said, Quran 61.004 Lo. Verily, Allah loves those who fight in his cause in a row as if they were a concrete structure joined firmly. Quran 61.009 He the one who sent his messenger with guidance and the truth religion to make it victorious and prevail over the religions, of all of them. Although, the mushrikin disbelievers and wrongdoers hate it. Quran 61.010 O who believe, shall I guide you to a transaction, that, will save you from a painful punishment. Quran 61.011 Believe in Allahi and his Rasul messenger, and jihad fighting in the cause of Allahi with your wealth and your lives. That, will be, better for you, if you know. Quran 61.014 So we gave power to and supported those who believed against their enemy, and they became the dominant. Hitler beguiled Germans into killing the same way Muhammad did, by convincing them that they would live forever. Mein Kampf 422 One cannot conceive of a religion which lacks the conviction of the continuation of life after death in some form. 47 The Quran proclaimed, Quran 3.168 Those who said about their brethren while they didn't engage, and sat at home, if only they had listened to us, they would not have been killed. Say, then avert the death from your own selves if you are truthful. Quran 3.169 And not think those who are killed in the way of Allah dead. Nay, they are alive near their Rabbi Lord. They have provision. Quran 3.170 Rejoicing in what Allah bestowed upon them of his merit and bounty. And they receive good tidings about those who have not yet joined them from left behind, not yet martyred, that on them no fear and not they will grieve. Quran 4.074 So fight in the way of Allah those who barter the life of the world for the hereafter. And whoever fights in the way of Allah, then he is killed or achieves victory, then soon we will grant him a great reward. Quran 4.095 Not equal are those among believers who sit, except those who are disabled, and those who fight in the cause of Allah with their wealth and lives. Allah prefers jihadists fighting with their wealth and lives above pacifists. All Allah promised the best, with Allah prioritizing jihadists who fight above those who are idle a huge reward. As with Islam, the quest for booty was violent. Mein Kampf 188 The talk of peaceful economic conquest of the world is the greatest folly that has ever been perpetrated. It is nonsense. Weapons are required for success. Mercenaries can be used, but a nation must dip into its most valuable blood and make sacrifices to bring about victory. The determination to fight and the tenacity of unflinching conduct is required. The Quran says, Quran 8.060 Make ready against them whatever force and firepower you can muster, every obtainable transport of military equipment you can mobilize, including war mounts, tanks, planes, missiles, and artillery, to threaten and terrify the enemy of Allah in your enemy, and others besides whom you may not know, but whom Allah does know. And whatever you spend in the cause of Allah shall be fully repaid to you, and you not be treated unjustly. Mein Kampf 196 Jews always form states within other states using one of the most ingenious tricks ever invented. They sail under the flag of religion, securing tolerance for 48 themselves. But actually the Mosaic religion is nothing but a doctrine of the preservation of the Jewish race. Alfred Rosenberg, who crafted the Nazis' position papers on Judeo-Christianity, said, as a book of religion, the Old Testament must be done away with once and for all. By comparison, the Germanic legends and the German mystics, pagans, teach heroism, soldierly conduct, and purity. The Nazis were no different than the Muslims. They resurrected pagan mystical rituals to mold the masses into unflinching warriors. Quran 3.070 O people of the book, why do you deny the signs of Allah while you bear witness? Quran 3.071 O people of the book, why do you mix the truth with the falsehood and conceal the truth while you know? Quran 3.072 Said a group of people of the book, believe in what was revealed on those who believed beginning the day and reject its end, perhaps they may return. Quran 3.073 And not believe except who follows your religion. Say, lo, the guidance Allah lest is given one like what was given to you, or they may argue with you near your Lord. Quran 3.075 And from people of the book who if you entrust him with a great amount of wealth will he return it to you? And from them who if you entrust him with a single coin he not will return it to you except that you keep constantly over him standing. That because they said, not on us concerning the unlettered people any way. And they say about Allah the lie while they know. Quran 3.077 Lo, those who exchange pledge charged by Allah in their oaths for a small price, those no share in the after, not will speak to them Allah and not look at them day the resurrection, not purify them, and for them a painful punishment. And, of course, they attacked the Jews. Ishaq 239 Jewish rabbis showed hostility to the apostle in envy, hatred, and malice, because Allah had chosen his apostle from the Arabs. The Jews considered the prophet a liar and strove against Islam. Here's what the dark spirit of Islam has to say about the alleged, albeit non-existent, corruption of the Torah. Quran 4.044 Did not you see toward those who were given a portion of the book purchasing the error and wishing that you stray the way? 49 Quran 4.045 And Allah knows better about your enemies. Quran 4.046 Of those who acting like Jews, they distort the words from their place and they say, we hear and we disobey. And hear not to be heard and reign at twisting their tongues and defaming in the religion. And if that they said, we hear and we obey. And hear and look us, lo, it would have been better for them and more suitable, and but Allah cursed them for their disbelief so not they believe except a few. Quran 4.047 O you who had been given the book, believe in what we revealed confirming what is with you from before that we obliterate your faces and turning them inside out and backwards and we curse them as we cursed companions of the Sabbath. And his command of Allah he executed. Perhaps, Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele and the Quran's demonic deity were colleagues, BFFs in torturous experimentation on captive Jews. Hitler and Muhammad were happiest when true believers were dying while killing for them. Mein Kampf 198. Unless you stake your life, never will life be won. The sacrifice of one's existence is the most essential supposition for the formation and preservation of a state with the necessary feeling of homogeneity. The readiness to risk one's life for this with all means possible is something that will lead to the creation of heroic virtues. Allah said, Quran 3.195, Lo, I not waste deeds among you from male or female, each of you from other. So, those who abandoned, renouncing in an obscene manner after extortion from what goes around, and were annoyed in my cause, and fought to kill, slaying and slaughtering and were killed while fighting, surely I remove from them their evil deeds, and I will admit them veiled and concealed, to the insanity of the jinn demons and the garden of bliss flowing from underneath them repulsive streams of chiding, a return and reward from a deviant and rebellious tyrant, obstinate in transgressing the bounds near Allahi. And Allah who with him handsome and embellished summons to reward. Mein Kampf 200. One does not die for business, but for ideals. When a man fights for economic gain he tries to avoid death, as this would rob him of the enjoyment of the 50 reward of his fighting. Only the fight for the preservation of the Aryan species will drive men towards the spears of the enemy. The Islamic version says, Bukhari, V4B 52 and 65, a man came to the Prophet and asked, a man fights for war booty, another fights for fame and a third fights for showing off, which of them fights in Allah's cause? The Prophet said, he who fights that Allah's word, Islam, should be superior, fights in Allah's cause. Speaking as if he were Muhammad bragging about Saddam's wounding at the Battle of the Trench, Hitler said, Mein Kampf 220, if the best men were killed on the front, then one should at least destroy the vermin, Jews, at home. Touting the power of religion and sword, Der Führer set the stage for holy war. Mein Kampf 220, can spiritual ideas be extinguished by the sword? Can one fight views of life by applying brute force? When contemplating history from a religious perspective, the following fundamental realization came upon me: movements with a certain spiritual foundation, may they be right or wrong, can only be broken early in their development with power, and only then if physical weapons are at the same time supported by a new idea, or view of life. The use of force alone, without the driving force of a spiritual idea, can never lead to the destruction of a movement and its spreading, unless the new spiritual idea combines a thorough repudiation of the last tradition. This requires a sacrifice of blood and a spiritual presupposition. Hitler, like Muhammad, couldn't destroy Judaism or Christianity with force alone. Both men needed a new view of life, a replacement religion, to wage war on all mankind. Their new, spiritual idea, or view of life, was called Nazism and Islam. Hitler explained Muhammad's rationale for clothing a militant doctrine in religious garb. These are some of the most insightful words ever written by an evil man. Mein 51 Kampf 222, all attempts at the extinction of a doctrine and its effects by force without a spiritual foundation lead to failure. Only in the eternal and regular use of force lies the preliminary condition for success. This perseverance is only and always the result of a certain spiritual conviction. All force which does not spring from a firm spiritual foundation will be hesitating and uncertain. It will lack the stability which can only result from a fanatical view of life, giving it a brutal determination. If Hitler was right, this passage has foreboding implications for the world because the sole motivation for Islamic terror and jihad is religious, and, therefore, unrelenting, fanatical, and brutal. Allah and Muhammad echoed similar sentiments. Ishaq 3:26, if you come upon them, deal with them so forcibly as to terrify those who would follow them that they may be warned. Make a severe example of them by terrorizing Allah's enemies. Ishaq 3:26, O Prophet, exhort the believers to fight. If there are 20 good fighters they will defeat 200, for they are a senseless people. They do not fight with good intentions nor for truth. Ishaq 3:26, Allah said, no prophet before Muhammad took booty from his enemy nor prisoners for ransom. Muhammad said, I was made victorious with terror. The earth was made a place for me to clean. I was given the most powerful words. Booty was made lawful for me. I was given the power to intercede. These 5 privileges were awarded to no prophet before me. Ishaq 3:27, Allah said, a prophet must slaughter before collecting captives. A slaughtered enemy is driven from the land. Muhammad, you crave the desires of this world, its goods and the ransom captives would bring. But Allah desires killing them to manifest the religion. Ishaq 3:27, Allah made booty lawful and good. He used it to incite the Muslims to unity of purpose. So enjoy what you have captured. Ishaq 300, I am fighting in Allah's service. This is piety and a good deed. In Allah's war I do not fear as others should. For this fighting is righteous, true, and good. Bukhari V5B 59 and 379, when we wrote the Holy Quran, I missed one of the verses I used to hear Allah's apostle reciting. Then we 52 searched and found it. The verse was, among the believers are men who have been true to their covenant with Allah. Of them, some have fulfilled their obligations to Allah, they have been killed in Allah's cause, and some of them are waiting to be killed. Quran 33.023, so we wrote this in its place in the Quran. Quran 33.021, verily, you have a noble paradigm and a good example for everyone to follow in the messenger of Allah, for him who hopes in Allah and the last day and remembers Allah much. Quran 33.022, and when the believers saw the Confederates, they said, this is what Allah promised us and his messenger. And Allah and his messenger spoke the truth. And it did not increase them except in faith and submission. Quran 33.023, among the believers men have been true to what they promised Allah. And among them who has fulfilled his vow, and among them is he who awaits. And they will not alter any alteration. Ishaq 3:15, it was so criminal, men could hardly imagine it. Muhammad was ennobled because of the bloody fighting. I swear we shall never lack soldiers, nor army leaders. Driving before us infidels until we subdue them with a halter above their noses and a branding iron. We will drive them to the ends of the earth. We will pursue them on horse and foot. We will never deviate from fighting in our cause. We will bring upon the infidels the fate of the Ad and Germ. Any people that disobey Muhammad will pay for it. If you do not surrender to Islam, then you will live to regret it. You will be shamed in hell, forced to wear a garment of molten pitch forever. Ishaq 3:41. Have you seen how Allah favored his apostle and how he humiliated the unbelievers? They were put to shame in captivity and death. The apostle's victory was glorious. Its message is plain for all to see. The Lord brought repeated calamities upon the pagans, bringing them under the apostle's power. Allah's angry army smote them with their trusty swords. Many a lusty youngster left the enemy lying prone. Their women wept with burning throats, for the dead were lying everywhere. But now they are all in hell. Quran 4.084. So fight and kill on in the way of Allah. Urge the believers to fight the infidels on, and perhaps Allah will restrain might of those who disbelieved. And Allah who's stronger, mightier, fiercer in punishment. Quran 4.089. They wish if you disbelieve as they disbelieved, and you would be alike. So do not take from them allies until they migrate to the cause of Allah. But if they turn back, 53, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. And do not take from them any ally and not any assistance. Back when Muhammad and Allah were bragging that Islam was the religion of Abraham, I shared something that I hope you found shocking. The word religion does not exist in the Torah, Nabi, wa Mizmor. Yahowah actually condemns everything it represents because the religious seek to control his people by corrupting his message. All religions, including Nazism and Islam, Christianity and Judaism, are man-made constructs. They are specifically designed to subjugate and fleece the masses, motivating men to capitulate for the benefit of clerics and kings. Religions are deceitful, destructive, and deadly. Nazism was no exception. Mein Kampf 2:22. Every view of life, religion, be it more of a political or a religious nature, sometimes the borderline between them can only be ascertained with difficulty, i.e., Islam fights less for the negative destruction of the adversary's world of ideas, and more for the positive carrying out of its own doctrine. Therefore, its fight is less a defense than an attack. The goal represents the victory of its own idea and the destruction of the enemy's doctrine. The attack on a view of life will be more carefully planned and more powerful than the defense of a doctrine. But the fight against a spiritual power by means of force is only a defense as long as the sword itself does not appear as the supporter, propagator, and announcer of a new spiritual doctrine. This is why I coined religotic to describe doctrines like Nazism and Islam that were as political as they were religious. Their religious view of life is easily the most menacing force on earth. It breeds tyranny, intolerance, deceit, death, subjugation, and terror. And not so coincidentally, these are the hallmarks of Islam. Quran 48.028. He the one who sent his Rasulullah with guidance and true religion that he may make it prevail over all other religions. And sufficient is Allah a witness. Quran 48.029. Muhammad is the 54 Rasulullah of Allah. Those who are with him are severe against the infidel unbelievers. Hitler was as religious as Muhammad, which is why Mein Kampf reads so much like the Quran, although, to be fair, Hitler was a better orator and writer than Muhammad. Mein Kampf 2:22. Every attempt at fighting a view of life by means of force will fail, unless the fight against it is for the sake of a new spiritual direction. Only in the struggle of two views of life with each other can the weapon of brute force, used continuously and ruthlessly, bring about the decision in favor of the side it supports. One needs a spiritual impetus for a struggle for life and death. The principal distinction between Islam and Nazism is that der Führer told the sheeple exactly how he intended to manipulate them, and der non-prophet was always disingenuous. Mein Kampf 2:32. Propaganda has to be popular, and it has to adapt its spiritual level to the perception of the least intelligent of those towards whom it intends to influence. After enduring Allah's dim-witted creation accounts and shameful bastardizations of the Torah, you know that Islam was designed for unthinking people, too. Mein Kampf 2:33. The more modest the spiritual assumptions and scientific ballast, the more it exclusively considers the feelings of the masses, the more striking will be its success. From Hitler's perspective, Islam was the perfect religion. It was dumbed down to the lowest common denominator, illiterate, ignorant, irrational, and immoral, malcontent Arabs isolated by a sea of sand. Speaking of how Hitler conditioned his faithful to hate the rest of the world, Goebbels wrote, when we drove dissenters from our meetings with cudgels, the audiences grew larger. Few people originally felt anti-Semitic, but the joy large numbers felt in the promise of blood-curdling treatment to be meted out to the helpless minority made them 55 responsive to our suggestions. Smashing windows and street fighting were relied upon to win the crowd. We shall reach our goal when we have the courage to laugh as we destroy, as we smash, whatever was sacred to us as tradition, as education, as friendship and as human affection. The people express a strange delight in the sufferings visited upon the Jews. Islam's inspiration for the Nazi Kristallnacht against German Jews on November 10, 1938, occurred between April 15 and May 10, 627 CE. It was also a harbinger for the sadistic rape, plunder, abduction, mutilation, and mass murder of Jews on October 7, 2023. And while I realized that we were tormented by the monstrous nature of Muslims at the beginning of this chapter, in light of what we have just read, the following bears repeating such that it is seared into our memory. Ishaq 4:61. Just before the noon prayers, Gabriel came to the apostle wearing a gold turban. He was riding a mule. He said, "Have you laid down your weapons and stopped fighting, Muhammad?" "Yes," he replied. Gabriel said, "The angels have not laid down their arms. I've just returned from pursuing the enemy. Allah commands you to march to the Qurayza. I, too, will attack the Jews and shake them out of their homes." Bukhari v5b 59 and 444. The dust rose in the streets of Medina as Gabriel's regiment marched through. The angels joined Allah's apostle in attacking the Qurayza Jews. Ishaq 461 and Tabari 8:28. The messenger commanded a crier to announce that all should heed and obey. He ordered that none should perform the afternoon prayer until after they reached the Qurayza settlement. The Prophet sent Ali ahead with his war banner against the Jews, and the Muslims hastened to it. Tabari 8:28. When the messenger approached the Jews, he said, "You brothers of apes! Allah shamed you and cursed you." Tabari 8:29. The Holy Prophet said, "No one should pray the afternoon prayer until they are in the territory of the Qurayza because warfare against the Jews is incumbent upon Muslims." Ishaq 461 and Tabari 8:29. Muhammad besieged them for 25 nights. When the siege became too severe, Allah 56 terrorized them. Then they were told to submit to the judgment of Allah's messenger. Ishaq 461. After the siege exhausted and terrorized them, the Jews felt certain that the apostle would not leave them until he had exterminated them. So they decided to talk to Qabi Asad. He said, "People of the Jews, you see what has befallen you. I shall propose 3 alternatives. Take whichever one you please." He said, "Swear allegiance to this man and accept him, for, by Allah, it has become clear to you that he is a prophet sent from Allah. It is he that you used to find mentioned in your scripture book. Then you will be secure in your lives, your property, your children, and your wives." Ishaq 462. Then the Jews asked Muhammad, "Send us Abu Lubaba, one of the AWS, for they were allies, so that we can ask his advice." The Prophet complied and the Jews grabbed hold of him. The women and children were crying, so he felt pity for them. They said, "Abu, do you think we should submit to Muhammad's judgment?" "Yes," Lubaba said. But he pointed with his hand to his throat, indicating that it would be slaughter. Lubaba later said, "As soon as my feet moved, I knew that I had betrayed Allah's apostle." Abu Lubaba rushed away and tied himself to a pillar in the mosque. He cried, "I will not leave this spot until Allah forgives me for what I've done. I betrayed his apostle. I heard Allah's apostle laughing at daybreak, so I said, 'Why are you laughing, Prophet? May Allah make you laugh heartily.' He replied, 'Lubaba has been forgiven.'" Ishaq 463 and Tabari 8:34. When Sa'd reached the messenger of Allah and the Muslims, the Prophet said, "Arise and go to your master and help him dismount." Then Muhammad said, "Pass judgment on them." Sa'd replied, "I pass judgment that their men shall be killed, their women and children made captives, and their property divided." Allah's apostle proclaimed, "You have passed judgment on the Jews with the judgment of Allah and the judgment of his messenger." Bukhari v5 59 and 362. The Nadir and Qurayza violated their peace treaty, so the Prophet exiled the Nadir and then he killed the Qurayza men. He distributed their women, children and property among the Muslims. Bukhari v5 b59 and 459. I entered the mosque, saw Abu said, sat beside him and asked about sex. Abu said, "We went out with Allah's apostle and we received female slaves from among the captives. We desired women and we loved to do 57 coitus interruptus." Bukhari v5 b59 and 461. He exiled all the Jews from Medina. They were the Jews of the Kinuka, the Jews of the Harida and all the other Jews from their homes. Quran 33.025. Allahu turned back the unbelievers in their rage. They did not obtain any good or advantage. Allahu sufficed the believers, in the battle. Quran 33.026. He brought down those who backed them among the people of the book from their strongholds, and cast terror into their hearts, so that a group you killed, and a group you enslaved as captives. Quran 33.027. And he caused you to inherit their land and their houses and their wealth, and land you had not trodden. Tabari 8:35 and Ishaq 464. As they were being taken in small groups to the Prophet, they said to one another, "What do you think will be done to us?" Someone said, "Do you not understand? On each occasion do you not see that the summoner never stops? He does not discharge anyone. And that those who are taken away do not come back. By God, it is death." The affair continued until the messenger of Allah had finished with them all. Tabari 8:40. The messenger of God commanded that furrows should be dug in the ground for the Qurayza. Then he sat down. Ali and Zubair began cutting off their heads in his presence. Tabari 8:38. The messenger of Allah commanded that all of the Jewish men and boys who had reached puberty should be beheaded. Then the Prophet divided the wealth, wives, and children of the Banu Qurayza Jews among the Muslims. Ishaq 465. When their wrists were bound with cords, the apostle was a sea of generosity to us. Muhammad's laughter in the midst of the Jewish massacre, and the gloating poetry of his mercenaries following the slaughter, testify to the similarity between Nazi and Islamic methods. Neither Muhammad nor Hitler viewed those whom they seduced favorably. Mein Kampf 234. The receptive ability of the masses is very limited, their understanding is small, but their forgetfulness is great. All effective propaganda has to limit itself to a very few points and to use them like slogans 58 until even the very last man is able to imagine what is intended by such a word. In Islam, these slogans were, submit and obey, because Muslims were deemed too stupid to think or choose for themselves. Quran 33.036. It is not for a believing man or a believing woman, when Allah and his messenger has decided and decreed a matter, that for them, there should be no choice in their affairs. And whoever disobeys Allah and his messenger, he has indeed strayed into manifest error. Explaining why the Quran was so repetitive and mind-numbing, Der Führer said, Mein Kampf 239. Looking for new stimulants, the people tire of everything after a short time. Thus the slogan has to be illuminated from various sides. Success comes from continual, regular, and consistent emphasis. Propaganda must be limited to a few points of view, calculated exclusively for the masses, and carried out with untiring persistency. The Quran may be the most repetitive book ever not written. There are 100 variations of creation, 400 repetitions of the never-ending argument, and nearly 1,000 pertaining to painful punishments. The last 20 surahs focus on a trio of recurring commands: submit, pay, and fight. Ernst Bohl, the manager of the Nazi journal, said, "Our most important weapons are the contention that Hitler is the bulwark of civilization against the Marxists, and that the doctrine of Jewry is the root of all evil. There are many who fear communists and many more who can be persuaded to dislike Jews. When violent nationalism is in ascendancy, as is the case at present, both Jew and Christian necessarily suffer." Hitler shared, Mein Kampf 673, if the Jews continue unrestricted, they will ultimately fulfill their prophecy, the Jew would actually devour the nations of the world, he would become their master. We have arrived at the kernel 59 of what the conspiratorial schemes of Islam and Nazism were all about. Likewise, Ishaq 245, the apostle used to say, "Do you love Jews and their religion, you liver-hearted ass, and not Muhammad? Their religion will never march with ours." Ishaq 239, Jewish rabbis used to annoy the apostle with questions and introduce confusion. Ishaq 240, the Jews are a nation of liars, a treacherous and evil people. Ishaq 248, Allah increases their sickness. A tormented doom awaits the Jews. Mein Kampf 252, the Jew robbed the entire nation, and was bound to hurl us hopelessly into the abyss. Mein Kampf 268, wretched and miserable criminals. In those nights my hatred arose against the instigators. With Jews there is no bargaining, but only the hard either-or. Islam's, your money or your life. Allah was in lockstep, Quran 59.002, He, the one, who expelled the kafir from the people of the book from their homes at the first gathering. You did not think that they would leave. And they thought that their fortresses would defend them against Allahi. But came to them from Allahu from where they expected it not. And he cast the terror into their hearts. They destroyed their houses with their hands and the hands of the believers. Then take warning, O you with eyes. Quran 59.003, if not that Allah who decreed for them the exile, certainly he would have punished them in the world and for them in the after a punishment of fire. Quran 59.011, do not you see to those who hypocrites saying to their brothers, those who disbelieved among the people of the book, if you are expelled, surely we will leave with you, and not will be obey concerning you anyone ever, and if you are fought, we will help you. And Allah who bears witness that they lie. Quran 59.014, not will they fight you all except in fortified towns or from behind walls. Their violence among themselves severe. You think they are united, but their hearts divided. That is because they are people without reason. Quran 59.015, like example those from before them, shortly they tasted evil result of their affair and for them a punishment. Quran 59.016, like example of the adversary when he says to a man, disbelieve. But when he disbelieves he says, 60 foot low, I am disassociated from you. I fear Allah, Lord of the worlds. Quran 59.017, so will be end of both of them that they in the fire, abiding forever therein. And that recompense of the oppressive tyrants. Mein Kampf 244, I often felt fury and indignation rise in me. I was tormented by the thought of destiny putting me in the place of the incapable, criminal, incompetent scamps of rulers. In the first Quran revelations, Allah had to threaten a nearly suicidal Muhammad to get him to crawl out of his bed and out from underneath his wife's skirt. If you recall, Islam got off to a rough start with a terrorized recluse. Bukhari, V1b1 and 3b6b60 and 478, the commencement of divine inspiration to Allah's messenger was in the form of dreams that came true like a bright light. The Prophet loved the seclusion of a cave in Hira. The angel came to him and asked him to read. The Prophet replied, I do not know how to read. The Prophet added, then the angel caught me forcefully and pressed me so hard that I could not bear it any more. He released me and asked me to read. I replied, I do not know how to read. Thereupon he caught me again and pressed me till I could not bear it any more. He asked me to read but I replied, I do not know how to read or what shall I read. Thereupon, he caught me for the third time and pressed me, read in the name of your Lord who has created man from a clot. Read. Your Lord is the most generous. Then the apostle returned from that experience, the muscles between his neck and shoulders were trembling and his heart beating severely. He went to Khadijah and cried, cover me. Cover me. She did until his fear subsided. He said, what's wrong with me? I am afraid that something bad has happened to me. Khadijah replied, never. By Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. The message to the quivering Razuli was conveyed in the early surahs like the Unfolded, which reveals. Quran 74.001, O you enveloped and covered up, Quran 74.002 arise and warn. Quran 74.003 and your Lord magnify, Quran 74.004 and your garments free from stain. Quran 74.005 and banish 61 trepidation, Quran 74.006 and give not a thing in order to have more, Quran 74.007 and for the sake of your Lord, be patient. We were told. Tabari 6-76, the inspiration ceased to come to the messenger for a while, and he was deeply grieved. He began to go to the tops of mountain crags, in order to fling himself from them, but every time he reached the summit of a mountain, Gabriel appeared to him and said to him, you are Allah's prophet. Thereupon his anxiety would subside and he would come back to himself. Muhammad explains, I was walking one day when I saw the angel who used to come to me at Hira. I was terror-stricken by him. Muslim, C74b1 and 304 and Bukhari V4b54 and 461, and then Allah revealed the verses of the Quran to me. O Muhammad, the shrouded one, wrapped up in garments, arise and warn the people against the Lord's punishment, and abandon the idols. Quran 74.001, after this the revelation started coming strongly, frequently, and regularly. It seems like a lifetime ago that we read this about the reluctant and reclusive non-Raziali. Quran 74.001, O you enwrapped in your blanket, arise and warn. He was afraid to crawl out from under the shadow of the revolting reputation he had made for himself. Quran 68.001, none. By the pen and that which they write. Quran 68.002 You are not, by the Rabbi's grace, a possessed madman. Quran 68.003 Lo, nor you will be an unending reward. Quran 68.004 Lo, you are on an exalted standard of character of sublime morality. Quran 68.005 You will see, and they will see, Quran 68.006 Who is afflicted with madness. Quran 68.007 Verily, your Lord knows better who have gone astray from his way, and he knows those who are guided. Quran 68.008 So obey not the deniers. Quran 68.009 They would have you compromise. Quran 68.010 And obey not a contemptible swearer or feeble oathmonger. Quran 68.011 Slanderer, backbiter, defamer, going about with slander and calumnies. Quran 68.012 Hinderer of good, a transgressor, a malcontent. Quran 68.013 Crude and cruel, greedy and violent, mean, intrusive, bastards. Ishaq 115 Now Muhammad did not want his secret to be divulged before he applied himself to the publication of his message. 62 inches Other words, he needed time to create enough of these rhyming surahs to make his claim seem believable. Quran 73.011 Leave me the rejectors, the possessors of ease. Give them respite for a while. Quran 73.012 Verily, we have heavy fetters with us, and a roaring furnace. Quran 73.013 In food that chokes, sticking in the throat, and a painful torment. Hitler considered himself the program maker, or founder of the religion of Nazism. In this next statement, he makes it clear, as did Muhammad, that the ends justify the means. Mein Kampf 283 The task of a program maker is not to state the various degrees of a matter's realizability, but to demonstrate the matter as such. That means he has to care less for the way, but more for the goal. The means to Muhammad's end were armed robbery, abduction, the slave trade, and human trafficking. His God said that the ends justified the means when he proclaimed, Quran 8.067, It is not for a prophet to take or keep captives as prisoners until he had made a great slaughter and conquest, subduing others in the land. You desire goods and possessions of this world, but Allah who desires the after. Quran 8.069 So enjoy and eat what you took as lawful plunder. And fear Allah. The way was to slaughter and steal. The following hadith demonstrates how Islam used criminal behavior to accomplish its goals. Bukhari, v4b 52 and 153 The properties of Banu Nadir which Allah transferred to his apostle as booty were used to buy arms and horses to be used in Allah's cause. And again with the Qurayza slaves. Tabari 8:39 Then the messenger of Allah sent Sa'd bin Zayd with some of the Qurayza captives to Najd, and in exchange for them he purchased horses and arms. Giving Muhammad a compliment, Hitler said, Mein Kampf 285 The founders of religions are among the greatest men on earth. He considered himself foremost among them, a fellow prophet. Mein Kampf 286 The program maker may be counted among those of whom it is said that the gods like them only if they ask for, and desire, the impossible. They 63 will always renounce the present. He will harvest the fame of posterity provided his ideas are immortal. His life is torn between love and hate. Mein Kampf 287 Their life and work is followed in touchingly grateful admiration, and especially in gloomy days, it will be able to uplift broken hearts and despairing souls. Mein Kampf 289 What we have to fight for is the security and existence of our race, for the fulfillment of the mission which the Creator of the universe has allotted. Muhammad was also a demagogue. As we learned in the 33rd Surah, Allah said that he was the ultimate example, the perfect paradigm, the prototype of perfection. Quran 33.021 Lo. You have a noble paradigm and a good example for everyone to follow in the messenger of Allah for him who hopes in Allah and the last day and remembers Allah much. Mein Kampf 297 I had no intention of joining a ready-made party, but wished to found a party of my own. This too is like Muhammad because Hitler tapped into the existing National German Socialist Workers' Party. Similarly, the non-profit used Qusay's religious scam, incorporating virtually every existing pagan ritual into Islam. Then he stole Judaism from the Jews, joined their prophetic club, and paid them a pittance for the recitals he twisted to complete the Quran. Consider this example. Ishaq 53 Qusay's authority among the Quraysh was like a religion which the people followed and which could not be infringed, they acted in accordance with its laws. He took for himself the mosque of the Ka'ibah. Neither Hitler nor Muhammad liked journalists very much. Mein Kampf 335 Freedom of the press is a nuisance that allows unpunishable lies to poison the people. Der Führer and der Prophet had their goons assassinate all who assailed the horror of their regimes. Bukhari v4b 52 and 270 Allah's messenger said, Who is ready to kill Ashraf? He has said injurious things about Allah and his apostle. He was but the first 64 of many who would pay the ultimate price for the courage to speak candidly. Hitler believed, Mein Kampf 335, an institution which is not determined to defend itself with all weapons practically gives itself up. Mein Kampf 336 A 30 centimeters shell has always hissed more than 1,000 Jewish newspaper vipers, therefore let them hiss. Not having cannons, Muhammad was forced to use swords. Both men, however, were ready to threaten God's wrath. Mein Kampf 338 In pious disgust towards this vicious disease, God will rain fire and brimstone upon this Sodom and Gomorrah to make an example out of this disgrace to mankind. Both tyrants were hypocrites. They were guilty of pedophilia, incest, polygamy, and rape, yet they condemned such behavior in others. Mein Kampf, 346, there is no liberty to sin. Our entire public life today resembles a hothouse of sexual stimulants. An editor's note says, communism was hedonistic at its core. A good many sound Germans turned to Hitlerism because they could not stomach communist approval of free contraceptives, aid to unmarried lovers, and unrestricted sex. Mein Kampf, 348, our culture must be cleaned up, and we must fight against these evils, or we will lose sight of God and insult the All-Highest. Even if you don't recall how tedious and harsh the 27th surah was when condemning fornication to accommodate a pedophile, not to worry because we will soon re-examine it in the context of Muhammad's ongoing saga of sexual indulgences. Therefore, in this regard, Muhammad and Hitler imposed rules that they did not follow, making them hypocrites. And if we were to pretend that punishing all forms of sensuality between consenting adults outside of an imposed set of restrictive religious confines was positive rather than negative, why would it matter when set up against a license to rape, pillage, abduct, and slaughter? 65 Hitler implemented Muhammad's strategy. Mein Kampf, 356, the more wretched and miserable a new institution is, the more it will endeavor to extinguish the last traces of past times, whereas a really valuable renovation must include the good achievements of past generations. Mein Kampf, 357, superior revolutionary movements will embrace the old forms of ritual and dogma. Only when the rays of the sun are gone is the moon able to shine. Any new idea, new doctrine, or new view of life which tries to deny the past or wants to deride it, making it valueless and untrustworthy will fail. Ishaq, 57, Allah's apostle said, whatever deal there was in the days of ignorance, Islam strengthens it. The first Muslims were comfortable with Islam, trusting it because in practice it was no different than Qusay's pilgrimage to the Kaaba to venerate rock gods and goddesses. Tabari 6:25, Qusay's commands were never disobeyed. As regards the Hajj, he confirmed the right of Arabs to continue their previous customs. He considered these to be a religious duty which should not change. Mein Kampf, 358, the reason men hate new moons is either their inferiority or evil intent. A genuinely blissful renovation builds upon the place the last foundation ends. It isn't ashamed to use existing truths. The new building stones should not wreck the old building, but rather take away unsuitable stuff which was badly fitted and then add on to that spot. In the opening volume of Goddamn Religion, we were regaled with all manner of fabled builders, rebuilders, visitors, circumnavigators, and consecrators of Allah's home for wayward rocks. And so, Islam and Nazism were alike in yet another way. Hitler explains why Muhammad had to change his Qibla to the Kaaba. Mein Kampf, 364, our cities lack the outstanding symbol of national community. The lack of such 66 a symbol leads to spiritual dullness which manifests itself in indifference. The Prophet coveted the revenue streams that flowed from the Kaaba Incorporated. In the second surah, he used the pagan shrine to justify mass murder and abduction for ransom. He transformed his people's indifference into violent rage. Quran 2.217, they question you about fighting in the sacred and forbidden month. Say, fighting therein a greater. But hindering to prevent access to the cause of Allahi, and disbelief in him and al-Masjidi al-Haram and driving out its people from it, greater near Allahi. And trials greater than the slaughter. Despots require uniformity of purpose. Mein Kampf, 364, the symptoms of decay include the lack of a commonly acknowledged view of life, religion, and uncertainty in the judgment and attitude towards the various great questions. You'll note that Hitler is not suggesting that Nazis ask questions, but rather that they all agree with his answers. Therefore, everything beginning with education is half-hearted and wavering, shuns responsibility and ends thus in cowardly tolerance of recognized evils. This encapsulates what we have encountered in the Quran and Hadith following the migration to Yathrib. The recognized evils were pacifist Muslims and Jews. Good Muslims were indoctrinated to hate them. They were told that anyone who didn't agree with Muhammad's interpretation would be killed and then roasted in hell. During the battles of Uhud and the Trench, Muhammad was afraid that his artificial world was about to implode. His followers didn't want to die without plunder. So they were questioning whether they could trust the curiously absent and silent Allah to uphold Muhammad's promises regarding those who died killing for him. So, Muhammad doubled down on his most deadly deception. Bukhari V4B 52-72, the Prophet said, nobody who enters paradise likes to go back to the world even if he got everything on the earth, except a mujahid who wishes to return so that he may be martyred 10 times because of the dignity he receives. Our Prophet told us about the message of Allah, whoever among us is killed will go to paradise. Umar asked the 67th Prophet, is it not true that our men who are killed will go to paradise and those of the pagans will go to hell? The Prophet said, yes. Bukhari V4B 52-73, Allah's apostle said, know that paradise is under the shade of swords. So the latter surahs established what der Führer suggested. Mein Kampf, 364, uniform religious convictions through a view of life are required. Hitler even acknowledged the superiority of Islam in this regard. Mein Kampf, 365, while the Catholic and Protestant denominations build missions abroad in order to lead new followers to the doctrine, an activity, which compared with the advance of Muhammad's faith, can show only very modest successes, in Europe they lose millions of adherents who now face religious life on their own. The consequence is unfavorable. Hitler recognized that Muhammad didn't tolerate renegades and that the sword of Islam was wielded above the necks of those who contemplated independence and freedom. Both men saw religion as their ultimate weapon. Without it, there was no way to acquire the power, wealth, and praise they craved. Hitler warned that the founders of religious movements like his own had to be careful not to completely destroy what they were attacking. This is one of many reasons that Muhammad incorporated so many aspects of Arab paganism, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism into Islam. Mein Kampf, 365, the violent fight against the dogmatic fundamentals of the various churches must recognize that without them the practical existence of a religious faith is unthinkable to man. The masses of people do not consist of philosophers, and faith for them is their sole basis for a moral view of life. The various substitutes have not proved useful in exchange for former religious creeds. In Hitler's mind, his revisionist and replacement creed was necessary. He realized that there would be chaos without a suitable replacement for Christianity. 68 While chaos abroad was supported by both Islam and Nazism, it was untidy at home. But if religious doctrine and faith are really meant to seize the great masses, then the absolute authority of the contents of this faith must become the basis of all effectiveness. The dogma of the religion, or the spiritual idea, must be limited and brought into shape without wavering, or it will never become a faith. Hitler is explaining that the purpose of Nazism and Islam was to establish the absolute and unquestioned authority of a single man. Bukhari V4B 52N203 I heard Allah's apostle saying, "We are the last but will be the foremost to enter paradise." The Prophet added, "He who obeys me, obeys Allah, and he who disobeys me, disobeys Allah. He who obeys the chief, obeys me, and he who disobeys the chief, disobeys me." The Imam is like a shelter for whose safety Muslims should fight and seek protection. Americans should have read this hadith before spilling blood, credibility, and coin in pursuit of an impossible goal, establishing a democracy in the Muslim world without eliminating Islam first. When politicians are ignorant and act impulsively, believing that bombs change religious beliefs, bad things happen. Mein Kampf says that if an old religion doesn't concentrate authority on a single man, then a new religion is needed. Mein Kampf 366 The value of an existing religion to a politician must be decided less by its deficiencies than by the presence of a visibly better substitute. As long as there is no apparent substitute, the existing religion can be demolished only by fools or by criminals. The translators of Mein Kampf said, Hitler attempted to make himself the prophet of the new German religion. He believed that if a new myth could be created and propagated as stubbornly, it would give Germans a new faith which the masses would cherish as tenaciously as they previously followed Christianity. Like Islam, Nazism was 69 a replacement or substitute religion. These doctrines are different sides of the same coin. Der Führer, like the non-prophet, condemned those who stood in his way. Both dictators became what they denounced by clearing away their rivals. Mein Kampf 367 Worst of all are those who abuse religious convictions for political purposes. One cannot proceed too aggressively against those wretched profiteers who like to see in religion an instrument which may render them political or commercial service. These impudent liars shout their creed into the world with a stentorian voice in order that others might die for it so that they might live better. The entire faith is for sale. For the seat of power they would certainly marry the devil. This is so clearly the modus operandi behind Islam, I'm surprised Hitler didn't admit as much. Quran 59.007 What Allahu salvaged for his messenger from people of the towns as booty to his messenger, it is for Allahi in his Rasulai, the kin of Muhammad, his family and wives, the orphans, Muhammad and the children of dead fighters, and impoverished, like Muhammad, and the wayfarer, in order that it not circulate between the rich among you. And whatsoever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatsoever he forbids you, abstain, and fear Allah. Lo! Allah severe in punishment. Bukhari V9b 84 and 59 Abu Bakr said, By Allah, I will fight whoever differentiates between prayers and the zakat tax, as the zakat is rightfully taken from property according to Allah's orders. If they refuse to pay me even so little as a kid they used to pay to Allah's apostle, I will fight with them for withholding it. Bukhari V4b 53 and 386 Umar sent Muslims to great countries to fight pagans. He said, I intend to invade Persia and Rome. When we reached the enemy, we said, We are Arabs. Our prophet, the messenger of our Lord, ordered us to fight you till you serve Allah alone or pay us the jizya tribute tax in submission. Our prophet has informed us that our Lord says, Whoever amongst us is killed as a martyr shall go to paradise to lead a luxurious life, and whoever survives shall become your master. 70 This juxtaposition of Mein Kampf and the Hadith and Quran is important because Nazism and Islam are so similar, we benefit from comparing how they cause men to hate, to justify conquest and plunder even if it means mass murder. And since Nazism is viewed as a political program, with the veil of religiosity removed from Islam, the unwarranted protection it receives is diminished. Also, few will deny that the consequence of the world's ignorance and tolerance of Mein Kampf was devastating. The synthesis of Nazism and modern technology stole millions of lives. Imagine what a similar doctrine would do with unlimited financial resources and nuclear and biological weapons. It is remarkable that Hitler's Mein Kampf is universally denounced as being inaccurate and poorly written, and the Quran is considered a valuable and holy book when the opposite is more accurate. Hitler, who is rightly considered to be among the most diabolical of men, a hideously evil psychopath, was undeniably a vastly superior writer and orator than Muhammad. Mein Kampf is better written than the Quran, and by a wide margin. It's like having the author's notes to the Quran and having an unguarded conversation with Muhammad. Hitler gives us the methodology behind the madness. I don't say this to venerate the most egregious and murderous anti-Semite of the 20th century, for surely he and his ilk have a confirmed reservation in hell, but to point out the fact that Muhammad was far worse. In comparing evil men and ranking them on the ultimate wall of shame, I would rank Muhammad worst, followed by Paul, Akiba, Hadrian, and Hitler. While they were all repulsive and condemnable, Muhammad's legacy is the most diabolical. Consider this insight, Mein Kampf 379, with the clever and persistent application of propaganda even heaven can be palmed off on a people as hell, and the other way around. 71 The most wretched life can be presented as paradise. In all of human history, none were better at this than Allah and his messenger. At their core, both Islam and Nazism are declarations of war against all mankind. While Muhammad was a ruthless terrorist and sand pirate, and Hitler was a vicious warmonger, they were both destructive and deadly. Of the 75 raids chronicled in the Quran and Hadith during the first decade of the Islamic era, only 2 were defensive. The Muslims lost one, Uhud, and barely escaped from the other, Trench. The Islamic terrorists quickly learned how to be offensive. Having studied them, der Führer agreed. Mein Kampf, 376, the goal must be to achieve a superior fighting power. Success lies only in the offensive. Mein Kampf, 384, what the German people owe the army may be summed up in a single word, everything. The army taught personal courage, martyrdom, in a time when cowardice, peace, threatened to become a spreading disease, and when the willingness to sacrifice, to stand up for the general welfare, was looked upon as stupidity. Much of this Hitler could have copied from the Quran surahs. Der Führer viewed the army as favorably as did his mentor. Mein Kampf, 386, the army teaches young men obedience. The German army is the most powerful weapon in the service of freedom. Quran 61.004, Lo, Allah loves those who fight in his cause in a row as if they were a concrete structure joined firmly. Mein Kampf, 234, to condition the soldier for the terrors of war the enemy must be introduced as a barbarian. Muhammad wanted to annihilate Jews so that they wouldn't continue to expose him as a fraud. After all, they held the receipts. They knew where he had purchased his twisted recitals. Hitler, likewise, had stolen the dogmas of National Socialism from Jewish Marxists. If he killed them, no one would ever know. It was his final solution. 72 Mein Kampf, 392, historical experience offers countless proofs of this. We've heard this a few hundred times before. It shows with terrible clarity that with any mixing of blood of the Aryan with lower races, Jews, the result is the destruction of culture. It is nothing less than sinning against the will of the eternal Creator. By trying to resist this logic of nature, the god of Nazism, man becomes entangled in a fight against his own existence, an attack that will lead to his doom. So the stupid and impudent Jew objects along with the modern pacifist, by saying, man conquers nature. Millions mechanically and thoughtlessly repeat this Jewish nonsense. They have no weapons at their disposal except this wretched idea. As if goose-stepping to the same drumbeat, Quran 3.069, wished a group from people of the book if they could lead you astray and not they lead astray except themselves and not they perceive. Quran 3.070, O people of the book, why do you deny the signs of Allahi while you bear witness? Quran 3.071, O people of the book, why do you mix the truth with the falsehood and conceal the truth while you know? Quran 3.077, Lo, those who exchange pledge by Allahi and their oaths for a small price, those no share for them in the after and not will speak to them Allahu and not look at them day the resurrection. And not purify them. And for them a painful punishment. Quran 3.078, Lo, among them, lo, a group they distort their tongues in the book so that you may think it from the book and not it from the book. Quran 3.099, say, O people the book, why you hinder from way and cause of Allahi who believed seeking it crooked while you witnesses? Not Allah who unaware of what you do. Quran 3.112, stuck on them the humiliation wherever that they are found except with a rope from Allahi and a rope from the people. And they incurred wrath from Allahi and struck on them the poverty. That because they used to disbelieve in signs and verses Allahi and they killed the prophets without right. That because they disobeyed and they used to transgress. Quran 3.118, O you who believed, not take friends from other than yourselves, not they will spare you ruin. They wish what distress you. Lo, apparent the hatred from their mouths and what conceals 73 their breasts greater. Lo, we made clear for you the signs, proofs, or verses if you were reason. Quran 3.119, verily, those you love them but not they love you and you believe in the book, all of it. And when they meet you they say, we believe, and when they are alone they bite at you the fingertips of rage. Say, die in your rage. Lo, Allah all-knowing of what the breasts. Mein Kampf, 422, the Jewish religious doctrine is primarily a tool for preserving the purity of Jewish blood, and regulating intercourse. Mein Kampf, 448, the black-haired Jew boy, diabolic joy in his face, waits in ambush for the unsuspecting girl whom he defiles with his blood and thus robs her from her people. Suggesting that a veil might protect women from defilement, Hitler says, Mein Kampf 619, if today physical beauty of the Aryan girl were not pushed into the background by our dandified fashion, the seduction of hundreds of thousands of girls by bow-legged, disgusting Jewish bastards would never be possible. It is in the interests of the nation that the most beautiful bodies find one another, and produce the Nazi paradise. Mein Kampf 406, without purity of blood, the Aryan loses the paradise which he has created for himself. Mein Kampf 413, the Jews are neither a race nor a people. They are an example of a parasitic product of decay. Mein Kampf 450, the most terrible example of the Jews' desire to become a tyrant, to enslave others, and for permanent subjugation is offered by Russia, where Jews killed or starved 30 million people with a truly diabolic ferocity and inhuman torture. Now Jewish scribblers and robbers rule over a great people. Jews are vampires who must die sooner or later. I have consistently stated that the Quran is more anti-Semitic than Mein Kampf. And while that conclusion is accurate, the competition is stiff. Hitler's God loved killing Jews almost as much as did Muhammad's demented deity. Mein Kampf 452, peoples who bastardize themselves, or permit themselves to be 74 bastardized, sin against the will of eternal providence, and their ruin by the hand of a stronger nation is consequently not an injustice, but only the restoration of right. Nature proclaims that they have no right to complain about the loss of their worldly existence. Mein Kampf 454, determined to fight to the extreme with the poison of Marxist ideas, the Jew and his Star of David rose higher as our people's will to live vanished. Just when resistance appeared vain, Providence gave the reward, victorious by the sword, it followed the law of eternal revenge. Mein Kampf 489, woe to the people that is shamed of seizing the Jews. Ishaq 262. Some Muslims remained friends with the Jews, so Allah sent down a Quran forbidding them to take Jews as friends. From their mouths hatred has shown itself, and what they conceal is worse. Quran 2.059. We sent a plague upon the Jews. Quran 17.007. We shall rouse our Muslim slaves to shame and ravage you, Jews, disfiguring your faces. Tabari 7:97 and Ishaq 369. The next morning, the Jews were in a state of fear on account of our attack upon the enemy of Allah. After the assassination, the Prophet declared, "Kill every Jew." Hitler's presentation of Jesus in Mein Kampf was considerably more accurate than the Quranic portrayal. Mein Kampf 423. The sublime founder of the new doctrine made no secret of his disposition towards the Jewish people. He even took to the whip to drive them out of the Lord's temple. For this Christ was crucified. I am often confronted with racist Muslims condemning Jews based upon a fraudulent conspiratorial book called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In that light, I find the next entry in Mein Kampf incriminating. Mein Kampf 423. The entire existence of the Jews is based upon a continuous lie, one shown in an incomparable manner and certainty in the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion. The Jews say that they are a forgery, which is the best proof that they are genuine after all. 75. This sounds a lot like Quranic reasoning. A dearth of evidence serves as validation, while the evidence of fraud is proof of validity. Not long ago the Quran was proven true because Muslims slaughtered unarmed Jews. But I will give you this: the Protocols, while fraudulent from beginning to end, was no more inaccurate than the Quran. The scholars who translated Hitler's manifesto added, the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion was first circulated in Russia during the early years of the 20th century. The tract purports to be an account of a meeting between Jewish leaders in the fall of 1897, the year of the First Zionist Congress. It became effective propaganda as it contained a horrible plot to undermine society, overthrow governments, and destroy Christianity. However, the minutes of the meeting are copied verbatim from a dialogue in Hades between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, in an attack on the Masons and the Bonapartists written in French by Maurice Joly in 1868. The Protocols merely substituted the word Jew for devils. Further, the anti-Christian plot was stolen from a novel published by John Radcliffe in 1868. He depicts a fictional scene in which an imaginary annual meeting of the 12 tribes of Israel occurs in Prague's Jewish cemetery. They discuss measures calculated to destroy Christians. So, even though the Protocols is a farce, editions edited by the Nazis were widely circulated in Europe. This is reminiscent of Muhammad's slanderous and fraudulent attack on Jews based upon his audacious perversions of the Torah. The Holocaust cannot be justified without lies. Muhammad and Hitler, the Quran and Mein Kampf, Islam and Nazism are couplets apart from time and place. Deceit was their common currency. The harassment of Jews was a means to an end, which was world conquest through 76 war. Killing was sanctified, even glorified. And millions have been sacrificed at the altar of our ignorance. Continue reading. Volume 1, Snake. Slithering out of the garden into the Quran. Volume 2, Satanic. Allah's Delusions of Grandeur. Volume 3, Submission. Islamic Genocide. Volume 4, Slaughter. Good Muslims Kill. Islam's Holocaust. Men killed, women and children taken hostage. Capitulation. Erase the expression, Apostle of Allah. Murderous Muslims. Tasting the torment. Blood and booty. Lord of devils, we ask for the booty of this town. Legacy of terror. The battle cry was, kill, kill, kill. Mujahid. Fight, kill, disgrace, and punish them. Jihad. Fight and kill until you worship Allah alone. Halal/Allah. This is a beguiling enchanter and sorcerer. Crucify them. The punishment is to be crucified. Profitable prophet plan. Allah who sent down forces to punish them. Prophet of doom. What is wrong with this man? Volume 5, Sunnah and Shuritan. Muhammad's despicable life, Allah's repulsive words.